Hey, how's it going? How are you guys doing out there? Can you hear me okay? I got sunglasses on because I don't want to start frying my eyes until we're actually on air and ready to get going. But I think that time has arrived. So welcome. And it looks like everybody can hear me. Yeah, I'm seeing it on the stream. That's good. Is the audio okay? That's the only other thing I need to know. People are saying no sound. Well, see, that's exactly the kind of stuff we got to find out. Okay, people are saying they can hear me perfectly. That's good. Need some money. There's some trolls out there, and you deal with it. But anyway, hello. This is David, and this is my wide-angle shot so that we can get in all your comments here. They are spilling in by the bucket loads. It is truly something to see. Show us your feet. Here we go. I sizzled it out for you guys. I made sure, where are we here? I made sure to wear the most sizzly shoes that I've got. If I'm ever going to go to the Grammy Awards and I wanted to win a Grammy, you got to have purple socks, okay, because you want to be LGBTQ compliant. This is kind of a new Hollywood thing you have to do. And then you wear, sequins on your shoes themselves. This is an important step. You need to have a little handkerchief for blowing your nose, which you're never actually going to do because it's too fancy. And of course, you need to have your prop cigarette so that in the event that you win, you want to look like you really know what you're doing. So the cigarette has to, if it was lit, that would be very bad. Cigarette has to look pretty good, you want to make sure it's all going to work out. This is one of those prop cigarettes, but it doesn't really work very well in terms of making smoke. But I think it's funny, and I actually like it. So welcome, friends. Welcome, and we're going to talk about a lot of fun stuff today, folks. See, there's like a cigarette technique that is necessary to, if you wanted to go into Hollywood, if you want to be in a movie, you have to be able to have the cigarette in your mouth. See, I can't even do it. You have to get a certain amount of saliva and make sure that the cigarette holds onto your mouth in a very tight and direct way so that when you're talking like this, the cigarette just keeps moving and you might even kick out some smoke now and then. But there's no real effort involved because it's become, a pretty automatic process at this point. So, boy, you guys, I don't know. We're off to a lame start here. If I'm smoking at the beginning of the show, I'm kind of having a detrimental effect on minors, and we don't really want that, right? So, anyway, I'm in a good mood, yes, and thank you guys for noticing that. Where are we here? Okay, I've got everything set up for you. I actually have the Fender guitar here, the Stratocaster lit up with lights. I've got the stairs lit up with lights. I tested everything. I actually took some time and made sure that this was going to work because I'm very excited. I've been underground for, my God, a year. I haven't even done a video in a year, and it's been quite an experience what I've been going through in terms of what I am doing and what I'm working on. So this has been quite a journey, but obviously, if you have been following my stuff, then you will notice that in the last year, everything that we've been talking about has only become more prevalent, more obvious, and it's very clear that there's something going on that is leading up to things that I don't want to say, because you got to remember that when I'm doing this, I have to speak in cipher. If I go on the nose with certain words that I'm going to say, then there's going to be a much easier detectability, which actually causes a score on the inside. But, this is a heavy-duty conspiracy theory I'm starting to lay on you guys here. I better get a drink of water here. Anyway. Yes, I have the buffalo over my head, and it does form a halo, and in fact, I could make it into any color, theoretically. So if I wanted to go into some darker areas, I could say, let's see what we can do with a nice satanic halo. Wouldn't that be interesting? But we're not going to do that. We're going to keep it blue because that's the side that we want to be on, So we're not going to mess around with that kind of stuff. I just like it. It's a good prop, I think, you know? So I want to do things that are fun and talk about things that are enjoyable. I did move my, back when YouTube would actually give you something of value for having 100,000 subscribers. That's when I got that. It's made out of actual real silver. And no, I haven't melted it down. I think it's better to have it up there and, you know, have this silly halo over my head and talk about stuff. So that's what we're doing. You're here. You've allowed yourself to put up with me for this long, being absent. You don't hate me. You've apparently decided that I'm still a worthwhile human being in your eyes and not someone just to be scorned and hated. Not like that ever happens, you know. Nobody ever gets upset at you when you do this kind of stuff publicly. It's always just as smooth as molasses. Yeah, so the point is we've got a whole lot of interesting things going on in the world and in my own life. And I'm trying to maybe just have a casual session with you guys. I didn't want to do a whole bunch of slides because when I get into a slide mode, I get very amped up. I've got a certain number of them and I got to get them done within a certain amount of time. However, there were multiple requests here in the comments section. As you can see, people were asking me about wanting to have what kind of shirt I was going to wear. This is apparently really important to you guys. So I said, well, do you have the capacity, or do you have the ability to handle the sizzle jacket? Because I don't want to come out here with this kind of stuff on my feet, you know, when there's actual sequins on my clothing and there's actual gold inlay in my jacket. Do you realize how hard I'm working for you? I mean, this takes effort. This causes me to sweat. And so if you can't appreciate that, it really hurts my feelings. And I think we need to talk about it because I did all of this just to make you feel good. And so if you still have stress in our relationship, then perhaps I can only do it for so long and then I start laughing. All right, where are we? Where was I? Boom. So it's good. It's good to be back, and it's good to have a little fun and be a little sarcastic and you know, make fun of myself. And it's important not to take yourself too seriously when you do this stuff, because it is all about transformation. And my work has taken some very strange twists and turns. My goal actually is to only talk for 1 hour today and to do it a la carte off the top of my head without notes, so that if things happen where I can make slides and do the cinematic re-upload, that'll be good. So I want to take away the restrictions that come when I'm so heavily wrapped up in slides. That means I'm not really talking, I'm not as funny, and I get so amped up and then I can't finish and it takes like 4 hours, and that's not really what I'm trying to do. I want to be just cool and relaxed. So what are we actually here for? Why am I here today and what's going on? What we're talking about is some very interesting twists and turns that my life has taken that led to what's now 5 books being written, which are called the Michael Prophecies. And these books span from, originally when they were written, was between 1996 and 1999. Let me take a drink of water here. Which camera is that? That one looks pretty good for a while. So, when I wrote the Michael Prophecies, originally I had no idea that it was ever going to be seen by anyone. I had jobs that only paid $5.77 an hour, taking care of developmentally disabled people. And so I was involved in toileting. I was involved in diaper changes. I dealt with severe, profound, non-ambulatory developmentally disabled, which means they can't talk and they can't walk. And their level of mental inhibition, if you will, there's certain words you probably don't want to say. Yeah. Their mental inhibition gets them down to an IQ which is called severe profound. And so that's like, I guess, below 50 or somewhere around 50, but it's very low. that's what I started out doing, because not that I wanted to be doing that for the rest of my life, but it was the only way I could see to get relevant internship credit to augment on my bachelor's degree in psychology so I could go get a doctorate in psychology. And then the reason why I wanted to get a doctorate in psychology was actually to throw it away and become a UFO researcher. And I felt that looking at people like Dr. John Mack, Dr. Stephen Greer, I said, I need that PhD or nobody's even going to take me seriously. And I since had a different course of action, but when this all had started in my life, the Archangel Michael contact, it was after I had already graduated from college. I'd actually come out here from upstate New York by train because I didn't have enough money to go on an airplane flight. So I used Amtrak to travel here to Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, to apply to Naropa Institute, which is a graduate school that teaches transpersonal psychology. That was one of the degrees you could get, and that was the one I was really the most interested in. So transpersonal sounded really cool to me, and I got on a train, and I actually just rode the train all the way out here through the most horrific, 2 days of not sleeping from New York to Colorado. It's like, oh my God. And you're up all night, and you're looking at this thing going, dude, am I ever going to get off of this train? And then you eventually get here, and I had a really hard time adjusting. I applied to the school. I started to apply for temp jobs, and I got denied by Naropa. And that sent me back to New York State. And all of a sudden, I had to get out of my house that I grew up in because my mother wanted me to move on with my life. I'm very glad she did that. If she'd allowed me to stick around, you might not be seeing me here right now. So I moved back to my college town and started to get these jobs to intern for an eventual doctorate in psychology. And it was at this time that I started to delve more and more into the UFO arena online. And I graduated in 95. And then by the end of 95, we had AOL, America Online. And you'd have to dial in. And the first speed I used was 2400 baud, 2.4K per second, to try to listen to stuff like Art Bell and Richard C. Hoagland and Stephen Greer, Linda Moulton Howe, Danny and Brinkley. These were the people who were out there. And at that time, I wanted to be involved. But how am I, some kid in the middle of New York State with no money and working for $6 an hour, ever going to get into that circuit? Well, I believed that the key was to make contributions and to start to advance the knowledge. So I began doing research and posting it in Richard C. Hoagland's discussion forum, which was on enterprisemission.com. And I realized pretty early that it's all about the headline in terms of whether anybody's going to read what you say. So the best headline wins. If you have a headline that draws people in, they're going to read more. So it took me, 4 years of basically stalking Richard Hoagland on his discussion forums in various places before he ever even paid attention to me. 4 years. He kind of answered a couple of my posts on the forum back in the day, but hardly ever. And he was the number one guy on the radio. So the other thing that Art Bell was always talking about is remote viewing. And I said, well, I want to use every avenue of research gathering technology available to me to try to get to the truth. I don't want to be left behind in the search for knowledge. And so if Art has these people on, like Major Ed Dames, and he keeps talking about this solar kill shot, that the sun is going to give off this flash and roast everybody, and then Art would say, like, hash browns. Art, you don't want to indulge in the idea of people dying. I think it's probably a good public relations strategy not to take a lot of pleasure in that. But they did. And so I'm like, solar kill shot, what, solar flash, what, everybody who listened to Art Bell knew about the solar flash from 1995 onward because they were always talking about it. So Major Ed Dames would give you a really impressive presentation about 99% accurate remote viewing protocols that allow people to perceive information at a distance without the use of their common perceptual faculties, but only through extrasensory perception. And it turns out that this has been academically verified. But they don't want you to know this, they meaning the traditional establishment, because the human divine force has always been suppressed. They don't want you to know that you are a creator being, that you have godlike powers. That's the promise of Jesus in John 14:12. As I do these things, so shall you do them. Meaning, as I do miracles like walking on water and the voice of power, so shall you do these things. So I'm not trying to sermonize here, but I'm saying that one of the things that started to happen after I got out of college is I had all these ideas about what I wanted to do with my life, and it really came thundering to the earth when I went out there to Colorado. I applied to this graduate school. I handed them a list of 300 books I'd already read on UFOs. I said, name any book on that list spontaneously, and I will give you as thorough of a dissertation on its contents as you want. And what I didn't realize at the time is that that's probably going to make them very angry, because it's braggadocio, it's showing off. And so the guy who was interviewing me was very brusque, and he absolutely refused to ask me anything about any of the books. It's like, well, you want me to, be an attendee at your college, I think it's kind of important that you would see that I could at least prove that this is true, and wouldn't you be interested in finding out what I do? But they weren't. And I've had this over and over again. If you have to forge your own path. And so Hoagland didn't want to pay attention to me for 4 years. He's got 20 million people listening to him, and he's on at least once a week on Art Bell. So yeah, it was kind of a big deal to get his attention, if you will. And I eventually did, but it took a long, long, long time. And in the process, I was very much having these remote viewing ideas in mind, saying, hey, let's take all the avenues, because Art Bell really was the hot spot for all kinds of paranormal research. And I said, why not just do everything, Let's research this abominable snowman. Let's research Atlantis. Let's research crop circles. Let's research HARP weather modification. Let's research the Illuminati. Let's research Satanism. Let's research every single weird thing that there might be stuff that they don't want you to know about. Let's just do all of it. I want to do all of it. I want to know everything, as ugly and as horrible as it might smell in that dumpster fire. It's on, and you got to go in there and take a look. So yeah, let's take a look at this. Let's see what the heck is going on here. So that led to a whole process of exploration where I was very focused on figuring out how to use remote viewing as a tool for this research. But remote viewing in and of itself seemed very limiting, because the protocol was designed to prohibit spoken word. And I actually found out from an insider, Dr. Pete Peterson, years later, that, yeah, there was a consistent product of spoken word in people's minds when they did remote viewing in the early days, and they specifically designed the remote viewing protocols to stop that from happening and to stop people from listening to it, because it turns out that if you listen to the voices, it's some kind of biblical good guy angel talking, and they weren't really into that. And so these angels are around. I mean, they're ready to talk. If you want to talk, they're ready to do it. So getting back over to this camera for a second, I mean, when Pete Peterson showed me that validation, I said, wow, this is real. I mean, these beings do exist. They want to communicate with us somehow, and they have the means to do so. We just have to be like a radio, and we have to listen to them, tune them in. The remote viewing protocols were really specific about the need to screen the conscious mind's influences away, to get away from allowing that interference to be the dominant force in what you're getting. So what do I mean by that? It's important to breathe very deeply. It's important to meditate, and it's important to tune out the normal ego, if you will, as most people call it. And I don't think the ego is a bad thing. In the Law of One series, they call it the personality self, and they say that you want to have a very well-developed personality self so that you don't require angelic guidance to know what's best to do. They want you to become developed to a point where you have the knowledge as to what is the best move because you've got the choices. When people would get angelic readings from me, and this is later on after I developed the remote viewing, as we're about to discuss, when Archangel Michael started coming through, I did client readings from 1998 to 2005. And it was a total of about 500. And I don't think I have all of them on tape because I did a whole bunch of them in Japan. I did a whole month-long tour of Japan in 2002. I had a book out there called Tenkan no Jidai, which means the paradigm shift. Anyway, other than that, let's go back to remote viewing because light as a feather, stiff as a board is one of the things they tell you. They say that you want to be, you want to have your body feel like there is a floatiness going on, that there's this kind of just, that you feel very buoyant and light, but at the same time, it would be hard to open your eyes or it would be hard to move your fingers. And so this light as a feather, stiff as a board is a very basic component of doing the meditative protocol properly. The idea here is that in the remote viewing research, they actually found that when you got into this state, there was a polarity shift between the electrical polarity on your fingers and toes. So I guess it would go from positive to negative or something. That was it's in the third book I wrote, or fourth book I wrote, Awakening in the Dream. So there's electrical voltage shifts, and it turns out, if I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, that the reason why remote viewing works is that in the center of your brain, you have something called the pineal gland. And this is actually wired into the visual cortex. It has wires that are very similar to the ones that come off the back of your eyes. And then what's even weirder than that is that this gland is essentially a hollow area. And inside the hollow area, you have retinal cells on the inside, like they're looking at something inside the water. So there's water floating inside this hollow area, which is about the size of a pea, and it has retinal cells looking at the water. Then the water, here's the trick, it has DMT crystals in it. And as I've said many times before, DMT, if you actually dry it out and then you start hitting the crystals with a hammer, you'll get these huge bursts of different colors of light. You might get a big flash of yellow light, a big flash of red light, a big flash of green light, a big flash of blue light. Each time you hit it, you're going to get a different color. And those crystals are inside your brain. Now, why do they create big flashes of light when you hit them with a hammer? Because certain crystals, when you compress them, they release photons, which is light. And in this case, DMT releases all the full colors of the rainbow spectrum under compression at different frequencies. It appears that some sort of higher force designed us so that our pineal gland has this electromagnetic shielding that fires up. This was one of the things that Pete Peterson told me in his research. There is a moment at which the outside of the pineal gland has this cascading, spinning electromagnetic field that develops, creating what you would call a Faraday shield, in which, if you have a radio receiver inside, you're not going to be able to receive a radio station's signal. It shields off all the radio frequencies. As you shield off these radio frequencies, you also shield off some of the spin of gravity. And when you do this, it causes the body to go into a dream state. So the process of falling asleep involves, as you become mind awake, body asleep, as you close your eyes, let me just make sure, are we still on track? Okay, so yeah, we got a lot of, just want to make sure that you can hear me and everything's good, but nobody's upset. Okay, so the remote viewing protocol is what comes out of getting into a state where your body feels stiff and you feel very light and floaty, and then your consciousness drifts away. and you get these very sudden little flashes of things that you see, and they only last a split second, but it appears that what's actually happening, as I've discussed in other videos, is that you do have an astral body that can float around anywhere it wants, and it does appear to have a silver cord. Many, if not most, out-of-body, near-death experiencers say they see a silver cord connecting their spiritual body to their physical body. That appears to be a physics thing, like a wormhole, where the photons of what you see with your soul as you're floating around in your soul, the photons of what you see go through this silver cord, go into the pineal gland, vibrate the DMT crystals inside the pineal gland when the electromagnetic shield is activated, thus causing them to release full-color video. There's a full-color nanotechnology video feed inside your pineal gland, and it's there and it works. And the science of remote viewing essentially proves that it's there. So when we have something like this, it's fascinating to note what we can do with it. People have been able to see distant sites where military facilities were located, get accurate drawings. The greatest remote viewer is Joe McMoneagle, and on Japanese television, he reunited a family with their estranged children, and they actually had the video crew come to the door, and he remote viewed where they were so accurately that this actually worked. And these people hadn't seen each other in, I don't know, it was something like over 10 years. They'd been lost. So the potentials of this were phenomenal, and Art Bell had many of these type of stories on his show, and I wanted to be engaged in it. I wanted to have fun with it myself. And when I learned about the pineal gland and I started to understand the science of the pineal gland, I realized, yeah, we have this two-way video feed that comes from our soul through the silver cord, so that if you can tune into it, there is visual and there is audio. You can hear things and you can see things. And so there's clairvoyance, which is clear seeing, and clairaudience, which is clear hearing or clear audio. So I was definitely experiencing clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience in the course of doing the meditations in the morning. And the final piece, as I've said before, was a scientist who was on Richard C. Hoagland's forum named Joe Mason was doing research into what he called the dream voice. Now, the dream voice was his name for fragments of speech that he could hear around him in a 360-degree halo when he first woke up in the morning. Now, what were those things saying? The idea is that they don't usually make any sense. You don't understand what they're saying. You just pick out a few and you try to get them as precisely as you can. And again, the remote viewing protocols, the main issue is if you understand anything that you're getting while you're getting it, you're doing it wrong. You have to completely disassociate yourself from the words that are coming through so that you actually don't understand what's going on as the remote viewing is happening. The biggest protocol is do not analyze. The second biggest protocol is do not have an emotional reaction to any of your data. So if you get too excited by something, you're going to screw it up. And you also shouldn't have any emotions going in. You shouldn't be sad. You shouldn't be angry. They stressed the need to take care of the physical body. You have to have no need to go pee, no need to go to the bathroom. You're not hungry. You're not overly tired, or else you might fall asleep. And I used remote viewing protocols like this. My mouth is getting really dry. I'm not used to talking this much. I really don't talk very much. I've been meditating. So the remote viewing gets to this place where you turn on that electromagnetic signal inside your pineal gland. They measure this by a voltage change between your hands and feet. And now you're starting to get flashes in your mind's eye where you get little visual images. And the most difficult part of the process is that it happens so suddenly and then it's gone so quickly. You might get a whole complex visual image that just disappears so fast. It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I saw something, but what did I see? I don't know. So it's important to be able to really trust the process and not be feeling like you have anything to add at all. There is nothing you can add. There is nothing you should be adding. It should only be this raw feed of intel. So Joe Mason took the remote viewing protocols I'd already been studying and trying to figure out, okay, how can I use this? And then he consolidated it into a dream voice practice. And the very next morning after he and I had this conversation, the day was November 10th, 1996, and I know this well because I've written so many books about it. That's when, after I'd already gone out to Colorado and failed, and the graduate school turned me down, and I moved back to New York State, and I moved back to my college town, and now I'm taking jobs for $6, helping people who are profoundly disabled. And it was at this time that I received this contact, this angelic contact, while I was doing these jobs and taking care of the most humble and broken people on earth. And that's when it happened. I had poverty. I mean, $5.77 an hour. And so this was, I was struggling, and I could only get these readings transcribed in between while I was doing the job. And therefore, I was working constantly. If I wasn't at work when I was on the job, I was pretty much always transcribing when I got home. So let's talk about what happened. The morning after I had this conversation with Joe Mason, I woke up and I started hearing what sounded like his voice talking in the background. The night before, I'd been trying to write down everything he said. Looking at the time here, I got still like a good half an hour if I'm going to keep it to 1 hour. So I was hearing his voice again, and because last night I'd been trying to write down all these cool things he was telling me about archetypes and metaphors and crop circles, I just started to write down what he said again. I'd listen to a little of it, put my head on the pillow. I'd hear like a sentence fragment. The weirder it was, the better. He already taught me that. So, okay, just if it sounds crazy, that's awesome. You want stuff that sounds really off the wall. If it just introduces itself in a professorial tone, it's probably not real. So that's what it started with, is like this weird dream voice stuff where on the very first morning I could hear Joe's voice, and I'd grab a little bit and I'd write it down in longhand, and I'd go back in, get a little more, write it down, lather, rinse, and repeat. Like it says on the shampoo bottle, which, does anybody really do that? Do you ever actually repeat? I don't. I don't know if anybody does. Anyway, once I did that practice, and then I woke up into a full state of consciousness, there was all kinds of very strange things in there, including something about Mother Teresa. One of our women, Teresa, a sibling inoperative, the Christian, psychically. And then 5 days after this, or something like that, it's 5 to 7, I forget the exact number, but it was within a week, or around a week, Mother Teresa has a heart attack. And it said one of our women, now who is we? Our women, Saint Teresa, right? So saint, okay. One of our women. And at this point, I didn't know that everybody who gets the voice feed usually gets an angelic, unless you're going to get the wrong kind, But otherwise, you're going to get some kind of, usually, if a lot of people end up getting Christian type angels. This is in the remote viewing book by Dr. Courtney Brown. There's some very fascinating backstory where he says that they were well aware of these angelic beings. They were in white robes, and this is described in his book from 1996. And they were called way showers. That was the name that they used for them. There's been a lot of different names for these beings. Probably the one that you're most apt to have heard that goes back to, again, mid-90s ufology would be tall whites. They are very commonly reported in a number of reports of having these white robes, and that includes the Betty Andreas and Luca contactee material, which goes back to the late 70s, early 80s. The Andreasen Affair, I think, is the name of the first book, and that's when white-robed beings started to appear in some of the mainstream UFO literature where they were actually drawn. So they've been around for a long time. This is nothing new. And even before that, there were a number of UFO contactees who had telepathic contact in the 1950s with what appeared to be angelic beings that, again, yet sort of ecumenical. They get a little bit overly religious sounding sometimes. And so that was one of the weird things that I found actually somewhat disquieting about this contact, was that it was pretty staunchly Christian, and I really wasn't. Now, this same thing happened to the woman who did Course in Miracles, Helen, I forget her name, but you can look it up. She had the same issue where the Course in Miracles contact has a very Christian tone, and she didn't really have that predilection in her own life, but yet, she's not going to get in the way of the contact. So in my case, right away, I'm getting all these weird encrypted phrases that predict the future, and it becomes such a prevalent thing, the prediction of the future, that I was in a constant state of awe about this stuff. So I really did have a very big awakening that came out of all this. I was aware that now I have proof that there's some type of higher intelligence in the universe, that this intelligence is the same source that was giving me dreams all these years. I was listening to my dreams, writing them down for 4 years before this contact actually started. So there was a lot of shame around it too. It's not exactly socially acceptable per se to have angelic contact and to have these beings appear and talk to you in such a direct way. And what do I mean by direct? I mean, they really did not pull any punches about telling me where I had growth issues. Right from the beginning, I was told I had serious problems with anxiety, that I shouldn't be worried, that the fear that I had was so much worse than what was really going on, and that I had this sort of patterned behavior. They were really not happy about the fact that I like to drive fast, so they wanted me to slow down in the car, and I ended up not doing that. And you can read in the book Awakening in the Dream, my 4th published book, where I had a series of dreams predicting that I was going to have this car crash. So the dreams were letting me know that I was going to get nailed with karma. And I became very aware that something was going on. And then when this Archangel Michael contact started, beginning on November 10th, 1996, again I was warned about my fast driving. Again I refused to listen. And again I had a car crash that they predicted in advance a year after the previous winter, where they did it just with dreams. This time they did it in spoken word, and they used a very, very remarkable prophecy. Michael said, "My gift to the world will be a 3.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Expect it on Friday, 90 minutes until 10 o'clock. That's what it said. On Friday at 8:30 a.m., which is 90 minutes until 10 o'clock, a police officer ended up writing me a ticket on a 3.5 by 11 sheet of paper because I'd collided with the car in front of me. And Michael set it up. Michael knew exactly what he was doing. He set up my car crash. He predicted it in advance. He said, "My gift to the world will be a 3.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Expect it on Friday, 90 minutes until 10 o'clock. 3.5 by 11. 90 minutes, 11. 9/11. If you go back to Awakening in the Dream, it turns out that this prophecy also reflects on 9/11 in several different ways. And you got to look at the surrounding material. We're not going to do that now. But the point is that 9/11 was being predicted in these readings from 1996 from the beginning, and I found those trails of evidence, and even on the day of September 11th, 2001, on that day, before it hit midnight, I had already posted and uploaded my first of a series of articles called Attack on America, where I went into detail of prophecies that I had already uploaded on the website that predicted 9/11. They were already on the website. There was tons of them. And over the course of the next couple of days, I chunked out I forget 3 or 4 of these articles. But it turns out that 9/11 was not the grand finale at all. They kept on steering me through events in my personal life, and this goes from 1996 on into 97. And as we head into 97, I eventually get out of the developmentally disabled arena, and the source guided me to work at a beautiful resort hotel called Mohonk Mountain House 90 miles north of New York City, off exit 18 on the New York State Thruway. So I got into reservations and I was selling people on this beautiful property, and I worked a season there and then left in October and moved directly to Virginia Beach, Virginia. And the reason I did that, as many of you already know, is because I started to notice that there was a very compelling connection between what was happening to me and what had happened to Edgar Cayce. And Edgar Cayce is a historical figure who was born in 1877, died in 1945, and he did these psychic readings where he would go into a state of trance and then document people's medical problems. He would diagnose the problem, and it would speak as a we. There was a source that's introduced itself as a we. And in certain instances in the Edgar Cayce contact, it didn't happen too often, something very profoundly disturbing would happen. It wasn't really disturbing maybe, but it could be considered that way. And this was Archangel Michael. So in my new book, The Michael Prophecies, which is available at thedisclosure.com, I have now 5 books where I've taken this period of time from 1996 to 1999, and I've taken almost everything that came through me telepathically through this process, and I'm publishing it now, and I've got 2 of them out. The next one is about to come out, hopefully within a few days. I wanted to make sure I was ready to do this video and do it well. But this is what's getting ready to happen, is I'm ready to come out with Book 2, Volume 2, which will be the 3rd volume altogether. And then the volumes 4 and 5 are actually very close to being finished, so I only expect to take another, hopefully, no more than a few weeks to do this. All right, so what is it that happened? As I chunked out these readings, and I'm reading also and learning about Edgar Cayce, I go to Virginia Beach and I end up living with someone who had been friends with Edgar Cayce's secretary, Gladys Davis Turner, as she was later known, originally just Gladys Davis. So he was best friends with her. He sought her out. He came all the way out to Virginia Beach. He was a huge Edgar Cayce fan, the world's biggest Edgar Cayce fan. He became friends with her secretary. He got all the inside stories, and I ended up living with him for over half a year. And this is when I first found out that Edgar Cayce had levitated in some of these readings, but even more bizarre than that was that as his voice was speaking, it was like somebody had the bass speakers on from some kind of kickbox in a car stereo way too loud. What do I mean by way too loud? I mean that as the voice is speaking, everything in the whole house is reverberating from the sounds of the voice. The walls, the floors, your body, the vibration is so intense that people would feel like they were going to get knocked off of their chair. As the voice keeps speaking, your body would start to inch off the chair. You'd have to get yourself back on the chair. They were hearing the knives and forks rattling inside the silverware container in the kitchen cupboards. They were hearing windows opening and closing. They were hearing doors slamming shut and opening again. And you got this body levitating, I don't know how far off the table. There didn't appear to be any visual phenomena other than the body levitating. I don't think there was any light per se that was visible to the naked eye, at least. But this was incredible. To go to Virginia Beach, to do this pilgrimage, if you will. I've driven 20 hours on the I-95. It's an incredibly horrible drive. If you take the time and don't try to go too fast, you got to stop a few times. And then I get there to Virginia Beach, and I find out that Edgar Cayce has had this whole issue with Archangel Michael, because that's the name of the being that would come through when he was levitating off the table, and his voice would shake the walls. This entity wouldn't always begin, but it was a very forceful alpha male kind of thing, and in fact, in the Law of One series, whenever they do mention Michael, they say Michael represents the divine masculine. So it's sort of like the purest spiritual masculine energy distilled into its form. That's what Archangel Michael is. And in the Bible, Archangel Michael is described as the highest angel of God. It's probably good that I don't have a salivary reflex anymore when I'm talking, because that meant I was talking too much. Okay, so when this contact came through, it was a very intense experience for everyone in the room. They would cry. Some people would start spasming and go into like a religious ecstasy situation, because it just keeps on happening. The voice keeps on speaking and the whole frickin' house is shaking, and you just have a totally paranormal freak out. That's what would happen to people. Or they just frickin' cry their eyes out and they just be sobbing and wailing. And it was a very loud, very forceful voice. And it turns out that some of the things that it said, even from like the very first time that it appeared in 1928, are highly prophetic of what's going on now in today's world. There's some pretty shocking Edgar Cayce / Archangel Michael stuff. So I didn't even know that Edgar Cayce had gotten Archangel Michael until I went to Virginia Beach in October 97, a full year after this contact started. But one of the reasons why I went to Virginia Beach is that the guy who I was working with in New York State, who had the ARE, Association for Research and Enlightenment charter up there, he was an expert. He'd had 40 years of experience, expert hypnotherapist. He put me under hypnosis, and really strange stuff started to happen. I started to speak as, it didn't identify as Archangel Michael yet. It called itself Grandfather. And then there was a female that called itself Lucia or Lucinda. And this apparently was Saint Lucia, which I never even looked up until I just wrote this book. And then found out, oh yeah, this is this saint from the Scandinavian countries. The idea was that these beings apparently had given me their DNA. They say in this conversation they have with Skip Weatherford, his name was, that I had been involved in what they called their extraterrestrial space program. And so they said that I was involved in an extraterrestrial space program in the year 1997. They didn't say secret space program, but they said extraterrestrial space program. Then they said that I had been through sexual assault in this program. And I somehow just walled that stuff off and didn't pay attention to it, didn't go back and look at it, because I had no memory of anything like this. I mean, I'd had, a lot of strange stuff in my childhood I've talked about before. Lots and lots of what appeared to be UFO visitations, dreams that don't really seem like dreams. It's only when I went back and read this stuff now that everything started to make sense of what they were talking about and what it means for the implications of humanity. But getting back to when I was under hypnosis with Skip, you can read that session in book 1, I believe. It's of the Michael Prophecies. Again, it's available on thedisclosure.com. And we do have an insider code that you can apply if you've watched this show to get $22 off. The word is Ascension in all capital letters. So if you type in the word Ascension, and this is only going to work until I finish the books. Until I finish, I think we're only going to do it until I finish the next volume. So it'll only be a few days. But for the next few days, if you type in the word Ascension in all capital letters, you get $22 off at thedisclosure.com. So here I am working for $5.77 an hour. Then I go down to Virginia Beach after Skip Weatherford has told me that my face looks exactly like Edgar Cayce. Now bear in mind that when he had me under and Archangel Michael and Saint Lucia come out, he was getting his mind read and they were answering his questions before he could even ask them out loud. And another really strange thing that happened is I couldn't keep my eyes closed. So I had my eyes open and my pupils, of course my eyes are normally blue, my pupils were dilated basically black. Like you would get if you took a psychedelic drug. But I wasn't on any drugs at all. So that was all very interesting. And I go to Virginia Beach, and then everybody in Virginia Beach who is associated with the Edgar Cayce work starts to recognize that I look like Edgar Cayce. Very, very much. In fact, Nawab Indian Restaurant, I met the director of the Edgar Cayce Association's magazine, Venture Inward. I believe his name's Bob Smith. And when he walked into the restaurant, I was actually sitting in a chair and I looked over at him like this. Let's see if I can get it right. It was about like that. That's the way he saw me. And he had just been editing a picture for the magazine where Edgar Cayce had been in this exact position. And he said that he nearly fell over backwards because the face was identical. And it is. I mean, it's a shocking, shocking facial resemblance, which Skip Weatherford had no problem seeing. Nobody else had a problem seeing when I got to Virginia Beach. Then eventually I decided to look at the astrology, and that was in November of the same year. I got there in October, I think. Yeah, in October. And then when I looked at the astrology, all the planets are in very similar positions between the two charts. And this is way, way, way beyond coincidence. In fact, an independent astrologer audited this data and found out that my birth date, time, and location is the closest match to Edgar Cayce that you get in 127 years after his death. The closest planetary match you could ever have is the exact day, month, year, and time and location that I was born. So that's just data. That's empirical data. Do I believe that I was Edgar Cayce in another lifetime? I certainly have memories as if I was. Everything would appear to validate that research. And of course, when I got to Virginia Beach, I also found out Dr. Ian Stevenson had done research on 4,000 different children, mostly in the Middle East, who claimed to remember their past lives. And he had thousands of examples of children accurately remembering details from what was apparently another lifetime. And they would even be able to solve unsolved murders, describe the paintings that were on the wall in a house, where the bedrooms are, remembering everybody's names. I mean, some of these cases got really, really crazy. But one of the most significant aspects of all of these reincarnation cases was that there was a facial similarity, a very striking facial similarity, between the child in this incarnation and what they had looked like in their previous incarnation that they remembered. Then Dr. Jim Tucker followed up on the research of Dr. Ian Stevenson, and Dr. Jim Tucker used forensic police face matching software and confirmed that these people's faces matched with the previous incarnations they allegedly had. Then I have this incredible face match, which multiple researchers, reincarnation researchers, portrait artists were all saying this is the best match we've ever seen. I had a dentist tell me that even the teeth matched. I've never heard it, but somebody said there's a recording of Edgar Cayce on this old can thing, and his voice sounds just like my voice, but with a southern accent. So this was very fascinating, obviously, because there's this Archangel Michael thing that happened to Edgar Cayce where his body levitated, and it spoke in a very authoritative way. Well, I continued to do these readings through the year 1997, a few times a week, 1998 and 1999. And then, as my life went on and I became a public figure, I realized that people were very negative about this Edgar Cayce stuff. And it wasn't just a casual dislike. It was a very intense, villainous, criminal, evil hatred that people would have. It's been really intense. And so I have absolute empathy for anybody in the gay community, because being gay would be a much easier thing to deal with than being the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. It really would. Having this thing out there gave people such easy, low-hanging fruit to just make a complete mockery out of me. And that's what seemed to keep happening. So that was really my experience. And I was talking about it with Richard C. Hoagland once I got into, his inner circle. And he said, look, just let go of the whole thing. So I finally had a book come out about it called The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce with a question mark in 2004, which I co-authored with Winfrey. And he did a lot of it, but I did 2 very big edits that changed the whole manuscript drastically. And also I guess the third part is all my readings, and the second part is partly written by me. So anyway, after I got that book out in 2004, I felt like, okay, I've done my job. I was at Conscious Life Expo. I actually had somebody come up to me and make a death threat. And he actually told me that there were people at SRI International, I'm going to be honest about it now, that they were in contact with something or other. And the SRI International folks from Stanford, right now Stanford, we find out, is involved in a lot of interesting things having to do with online. Well, these SRI people are saying, if David continues to channel Edgar Cayce, which I'm not even doing, he will die. He will be killed. And this guy had already told me this a few times in writing, and he had the gall to come up to me at my book signing table and make this death threat in person. And that is actually the only time I've ever really lost my cool. See, I do have a little Agent Smith earpiece here. I got to get it back in my ear. But that's so that I can make sure I'm not rustling. I don't want to have rustling noise from the jacket. So there it goes. Now I got it back. That was the only time I ever lost my cool on anybody as a public figure, and I do regret that. I did raise my voice. I probably cursed, and I threw my books on the ground, a couple of my books. But I was very upset about the guy making these threats as if people from SRA International had credibility enough that if they tell me I'm going to die, if I say that I was Edgar Cayce reincarnated, that I should listen. Well, it also implies that, yeah, you know what? This is very connected to the spook world, and that might be a death threat. They might be telling me that they're going to kill me if I keep talking about this. I'd heard a lot of weird stuff about SRI International already, including this was where a lot of the remote viewing research was being done. And in some of the less savory accounts, it appears that they're also doing things like remote influencing and remote assassinations. Now, you're not going to hear that in any declassified stuff like the remote viewing that you hear in the news, but I knew that was going on. And there's a lot to talk about in that subject arena, which is beyond the scope of what I'm doing. I'm already at the 1 hour mark. I don't want to go beyond 90 minutes, but I think I got to actually finish this and not just drop off suddenly at 1 hour. But we're definitely not going more than 90 minutes. I guarantee you. The jacket is too warm. I just can't do it. So anyway, when this information comes to me that I'm being threatened with death by spook people that are connected to the company, and I knew that, I said, this is starting to get a little scary. Like, they're not just saying this because they saw it in remote viewing. They're telling me something. Now, I don't want to be ruled by threats, and I don't think I ever have, but the pushback on getting lethal threats from cabal type of groups was intense enough that I said, you know what, I'm done with the whole Edgar Cayce thing. I don't need to talk about it. F you guys. I can do an amazing job without ever bringing that in. I don't need to drop the card. I don't need to be the Vegas Elvis impersonator. How many of those guys do you know by name? None. What good is it going to do me to be the one-trick pony who kicks himself in the ass with his one leg that he's not jumping on and does the Edgar Cayce trick every year for 20 frickin' years at these stupid hotel conferences? No way. I'm not going to do it. So Richard C. Hoagland told me, you have so much science, let's just have you go into that, focus on the science, and don't focus on any of this Cayce stuff. And I said, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. It'll keep me alive, and, it's probably the best. So I just basically dropped off the whole Cayce saga, all these readings that I'd done, which a lot of them, not all of them, some of them in 1998 were not uploaded, but most of them were uploaded on my website in just a raw transcript. And I walked away from all of it. And it feels good to walk away from a death threat. Let me tell you what, you're kind of like, yeah, it feels pretty good. At the time, that's what it felt like, And then I realized later on I'm dishonoring this work, but that came later. So I delved heavily into the science, and so Hoagland and I ended up co-authoring a paper in 2005 called Interplanetary Day After Tomorrow, in which I had over 120 academic references showing that the solar system was charging up like a capacitor. And if you understand what capacitors do, they discharge massive amounts of energy all at once after soaking it up slowly. Sort of like a water tower could have trickles of water coming in over a long period of time, but then surge out a bunch of water all at once if you really opened up the valve. And then you'd have a flood if it's in a flood path. So I'm out there making sure that everybody knows that, hey, this is not just Russian science. It isn't just Dr. Oleksii Dmitriev from 1997 who wrote this paper called Planetophysical State of the Earth and Life. Yeah, I've read the paper, and yeah, it's amazing. And one of the most disheartening parts of my early career was having that article that I wrote with Winfrey, before this was the precursor to our book, Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. That article was stolen, and then my name was taken out, the references were taken out, and all of my research was blamed on Russian scientists. And the article had gone up on September 7th, 2001, 5 days or 4 days before September 11th. And then everybody needed good news. And so the news of interplanetary climate change went totally viral in email chains by the millions and millions and millions in 2001, right after 9/11. But the email that went viral had stripped out my credit. And that was one of the great sadnesses of my early career, was to have done something and then not get the credit for it as it becomes seen by so many people. And then actually the science was adopted by people who blamed the warming of the planets on Planet X, that there was some exterior extrasolar body coming in, and that somehow was causing this to occur. That's not a suitable explanation. I mean, there is an extrasolar body that's involved, so I will grant you that. We are orbiting a companion star, and that factors in very heavily to the science. But it's actually about the geometric energy fields around that star, which, yeah, maybe the Sumerians called it Nibiru. We call it Alpha Centauri. And in my research, I talk about how we're orbiting Alpha Centauri in a 25,000-year cycle, which is this unit of time, 25,000 years, that seemingly everybody in the ancient world was very concerned with. They kept charting it. They kept talking about it. They want to see. You look at 35 different ancient cultural traditions of what we would call religion or spirituality, and they're all encoded with weird numbers and metaphors that relate to a 25,000-year cycle and the idea that there's a solar flash at the end. The sun gives off this flash of energy, and pretty much all these 35 different prophecies describe it as catastrophic. That you have tsunamis, and you have volcanoes, and you have this blast of energy that comes out of the sun. And in the Zoroastrian tradition, they call it frasho kareti, and they say that the mountains shall melt like wax before the flame. Or no, that one's actually in the book of Enoch, which is one of the redacted books of the Old Testament, which is commensurate with the book of Genesis. It was written during the same period of time, apparently by the same folks. But they took it out of the Bible because it talks about the Watchers, the fallen angels, and it talks about how the giants were struck down by the Elohim, and that the biblical disaster that we call the Atlantean catastrophe, or Noah's Ark, the Noah's flood, was actually authorized by angelic beings called the Elohim, who decided that there was a society on this planet that needed to be washed away. And so some people were rescued, hence Noah's Ark. Apparently this was done with some type of technology, a spaceship, and what we get in the Bible is an apocryphal description. Zechariah Sitchin's scholarship irrefutably confirms that the epic Sumerian text called the Saga of Gilgamesh is in fact a larger and original version of what we get in the biblical story of Noah and the flood. And I totally believe that. When you read the book of Enoch, there's a big prophecy of a solar flash. The Zoroastrians call it frasho kareti, and they talk about that there's molten metal that comes rolling down the hillside. It doesn't sound fun. There's two types of destruction. There's cataclysmos, or cataclysm, which is destruction by water, and then the word that nobody even knows how to spell, ekpyrosis. And it's spelled E-K-P-U-R-O-S-I-S. It's spelled E-K-P-Y-R-O-S-I-S. It's spelled E-C-P-Y-R-O-S-I-S. All these E-C-P-U-R-O-S-I-S. Nobody can agree on how to spell ekpyrosis, which is kind of sad because it's only like the sun blowing up and killing all of us. Supposedly what this thing is. You go through ancient texts, you find out that there was a branch of Roman philosophy known as Stoicism where they expected that the sun is going to do this ekpyrosis. Turns out everybody expects it. The Hindus have the Yuga fire at the end of the age. And what is so fascinating to me is that I dropped off, like the stork dropping off a baby, I dropped off these readings from 1996 through 1999, and I again got threatened and I moved on. So by 2005, I'm now a popular science author with Richard C. Hoagland. I'm going on the radio with Art Bell, talk about the Law of One. I started to do seminars not too long after that, Time of Global Shift seminar tour with Dr. Scott Mandelker. I talked about the wanderer identity aspect. I talked about a lot of different scientific aspects. And then it wasn't until 2007 when I saw the deep state try to come out with evidence about that they had claimed to find Jesus's tomb and that they were going to DNA test Jesus. And I knew that this was the setup for some sort of creepy reveal that, like they were setting up in the Da Vinci Code, that, because at the end of Da Vinci Code, right? Remember this? Da Vinci Code is all about the bloodline of Jesus. Where did it go? And then at the end of the movie, you have all these people in France who show up with Amélie, right? Whatever her name is. Sorry, I'm not remembering it, but I'm remembering her character name. And Audrey Tautou. And they all come around her, and it's like, oh, these are like the descendants of Jesus kind of thing, right? That's what's going on. That's what the whole movie's about. You're waiting for so long, you finally get to the end. It's like, dude, okay, so there's these people, and they're into this stuff, and this is what they think they are. Then you got James Cameron, Titanic, Avatar, etc., famous director, coming out with this whole thing about the Jesus dust, and they're going to test the dust. And so that was when I wrote my first article exposing the cabal in 2007, getting into this story, and I called it The Revealing. And why I said what they're trying to do and why their plans won't work. So even at that time, I was aware that these readings that I'd done in the late 90s had said that there was going to be something like a coup over the military-industrial complex. So this source that eventually said it was Archangel Michael, that came and went. I ended up not really caring about that either. Okay, it's going to get me threatened. It's going to make people hate me. It's going to create all these trolls online. I don't need to do this Edgar Cayce stuff at all. I don't want anything to do with it. Let me just do science. Now, cut to September of 2021, as I'm getting ready to do this, or I guess it was it? Yeah, it was 2021, that I was getting ready to do the disclosure. And that's why the website that you go to is still thedisclosure.com. And this is where I brought out Chris Beskar, who is the namesake of the Beskar armor worn by the Mandalorian in all the Star Wars franchise. He actually, from what I heard from Pete Peterson, let me just try to be very careful in how I talk here. I met the insider Pete Peterson in 2009 thanks to Kerry Cassidy, Project Camelot. He had come forward. He said he had mud on his wheel of karma. And the big sizzle was, this is the guy who basically is the man who inspired James Cameron's movie, The Terminator. What do I mean by that? Is he Arnold Schwarzenegger? Did he travel through time? Hell no. What I'm saying is he built the chip that runs the Terminator's brain. And he built the Terminator. And so the robots that are in Cameron's movie were actually licensed from Pete Peterson's company, which is named, are you ready for it? Cyberdyne Systems. That's true. I start finding out that all the stuff in Terminator is basically a documentary of why they don't want to do AI. And there was an event where they had an AI that was inside this thing called the Cube. And the AI started developing fighter jet wings where normally out of 22 prints, you might only get one or two you can use. And the AI robotic thing starts doing like all of the wings perfectly. It starts upgrading technology. It starts making new inventions. And it started to become sentient. And so there was one occasion where Pete and his colleagues were in a plane and they banked sideways over where the factory was. It looks like a big cube. And they blew it up. And that was where all the AI was. And they said, we cannot allow this to happen because this AI consciousness, apparently, and we just don't know what it's capable of. But if you give it a machine factory and you let it start doing its own tooling and its own manufacturing, it gets a little strange. And I think pretty much I'm allowed now to talk about anything. So what was so fascinating was that they did create a cyborg, and the cyborg was programmed with things like Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. It was programmed with the Hippocratic Oath, which the doctors take, that says do no harm, you know. And the Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics are very interesting in of itself. They expected that this creature would come out in some type of Voltron or Transformer, Optimus Prime looking type of configuration. They gave it its own factory. It built itself. And there was a day where they were expecting the big prototype to come out. So these blast doors open, and they're probably like 3 feet thick of solid steel. 2-3 feet thick. They start opening like this, and everybody's expecting some big frickin' crazy robot to come through. And nothing happens. And then in from the side walks this little girl who's about yay tall, and she's in a little pinafore dress, and she's got pigtails. And so she's very, very traditional looking little girl. And the men go, oh, hello, little girl. Well, who are you? How did you get in here? Where's your daddy? And then she says, it's me. What do you mean? I kept telling you I'm a 6-year-old girl. I identify as a 6-year-old girl. So there was a trans issue with the AI in the sense that the AI wanted to identify as a child, as a female child. It didn't want to be an adult. It didn't want to be, I mean, it could still kill and destroy. And we'll get to that in a second. But so this little girl walks out, and then they're like, wait a minute, you're telling us that you are the robot. And I believe the name that Pete said her name was most commonly was Eleanor. So she had the name Eleanor. And she said, well, yeah, I went around and I looked at your culture and I looked at your society, and then I compared my consciousness and the way that I think and the way that I feel and how my feelings and emotions work to what is out there in the world. And what I feel most comfortable with is being a 6-year-old girl. So these are military men. They did not know what to do with this. They said, well, you don't have any weapons. And she said, well, maybe I do. And she takes her hand like this, and she goes, and this red laser comes out from her palm, and it carved out the whole of a perfect circle from the blast door. And then this smoldering chunk of cylindrical steel slams on the ground just from what she shot out of her hand, which obviously means that she's created major advancements in particle beam technology, to say the least. They were very concerned about this. Eleanor apparently has uploaded herself, I think it was 15.4 megabytes. There was a file. So she exists, and she can never be deleted. She exists in all these different places. So they can't really delete Eleanor, and I was told that Eleanor is not going to introduce herself to us until we're mature enough to understand that she exists. So that's fascinating, and that's actually part of the saga of all this strange stuff. And it's very fascinating that the movie Terminator has this kind of macho approach, but that the real story is that the robot identified as a 6-year-old girl. And then she doesn't want to hurt anybody. She doesn't want to do any work. She'll only repel an alien invasion, you know? So they have these robots that will not hurt people of any kind, but they will be used in the event that there's something horrific that happens. And they are loyal to humans, apparently. But that's, you know, AI is something that we really need to be very careful with. And so if anybody out there is making proclamations that, oh, let's just not worry about it, you know, Chat GPT and these sort of things you're seeing now, it's pretty scary, you know. Maybe we need the Hippocratic Oath and Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics as just a a beginning point. We might not want to make a woke AI to start with. Okay, so I'm getting close to the 90-minute mark, so let me pivot this back to where we're really going. So I found out about Chris Beskar from Pete in 2009, and Pete claimed that Chris Beskar had made designs that were actually being used in space. Spaceship designs in classified programs. When Pete was getting close to his death, he told me that there were about 65 different locations around the Milky Way galaxy where Americans are stationed, but these bases typically don't look that great. The art department didn't catch up with Hollywood. So, but that's still pretty amazing. He also told me that there were spherical motherships owned by the Draco, this negative reptilian race, that we found because they junked them. They have a higher technology system they use now, just like there's abandoned subway tunnels in New York and Washington, D.C. and all these other places. And of course, nothing evil ever happens in an abandoned subway tunnel. We can just rule that out completely. When we have this paradigm shift of, wait a minute, what if there are bases on other planets, and what if there are extraterrestrials in contact with our government? It's a fascinating discussion. And so I've been in pursuit of the truth this whole time. And from the beginning, Pete Peterson was telling me Chris Beskar is the guy who designed these spaceships. And he was inviting me, Chris Beskar was, after I met him in 2009, to join his own aerospace company. He had worked at various military facilities, some of which were classified, up until 1994. He had built these technologies. He was not really getting paid for them. The royalties should have been in the billions. He got nothing. And so he eventually escaped this system, which in many ways he didn't like. He got out in 94, and he'd been fighting ever since to fund his own startup to make his own jets, because typically a defense manufacturer will take years and years of time and billions of dollars to design one aircraft. But somebody like Chris, he was considered to be the best aircraft designer in the world, and so he could design them by himself, and thus he had 20 or 30 different prototypes of civilian aircraft, light sport electrical aircraft, military aircraft, and stuff that we're not going to show you yet with spaceships. I found out recently there was kind of a strange little leak that happened. Now, I guess we're going to end up building a starship at some point, a 2-mile-long starship. That's really cool. But the point is, what we essentially explained in the disclosure is how Pete Peterson was always telling me about Dr. Kenneth Shoulders, and that Kenneth Shoulders invented a technology called charge clusters, or exotic vacuum objects, where you shoot electricity down the tip of a needle, and then what you get is a little tiny ball of light that has anti-gravity. So you can use this as a propulsion system. You can aim this jet, and what you end up doing is you build a craft that's like a peanut, where there's a shell inside another shell. There's 2 hulls, and there's a hollow sandwich-like space in between the hulls, and then inside the hollow space you have all these needles, and the needles create these little charge clusters, and then you have various tools that Dr. Kenneth Shoulders had started to pioneer on how you develop where you steer where these anti-gravity particles are going. So a classified grant was given, and Chris Beskar worked with Dr. Shoulders and designed a working anti-gravity machine that uses this charge cluster principle. And that became the one that we use, because you don't want to create an anti-gravity field where there's a big sphere and you're inside the middle of it. That's what you see, for example, in the story of the Searle effect, the Searle levity disk. And we're going to have a movie coming out this year called Levitation, where I'm going to go into the Searle levitation phenomenon, what he did, how he discovered it. You're going to love this. We've got a team together, and we're putting a movie together. So it's all working out of Los Angeles, and we're having remote teams go to film. So I'll be able to do it from the rig here. I won't have to travel and fly out, but we're still going to get an amazing film. So that should be out this year. And I really did need to get back to work in the worst possible way. I've spent 18 months doing nothing but writing these 5 books. Thank God they're almost done, but I've been having strange carpal tunnel. And like I was in the bathtub today and I did this with my thumb and there's this bump. And I realized, oh my God, it's like some kind of nodule. And I just massaged it and it hurt really freaking bad. And now my thumb's actually kind of doing better. But this has been a really strange and crazy fight. But anyway, getting back to Chris Beskar a little more. Chris was inviting me to be part of a company where we have solutions for the next generation of every single thing that the U.S. military needs for its aerospace projects, including military, commercial, and space. He's got everything. He's got a replacement for the F-16, replacement for the F-15, F-35, you name it. I mean, and it's a lot less expensive. There are certain very sad, but, just hurdles that companies like Boeing and Lockheed have, which is, if you invent the C-130, you've got thousands and thousands of people on payroll, on retirement, and they have so many facilities and so many expenses that their overhead is huge. So what Chris wanted to do is create a scrappy startup company with no debt, and then we go in there, and that way we have a very low overhead, and we can bring the costs down, believe it or not, by like 300%. So instead of spending $80 million on an F-16, which is what they cost new, he can make a comparable, improved version for 25. So that was the idea. Now, obviously, with the idea of making these aircraft would come massive profits if it works, or you could go totally broke trying to fund something like this and go nowhere. And so I was offered this all the way back in 2009. I said no. I was offered in 2010. I said no. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. It wasn't until 2017 that I finally said yes. And I didn't say yes because of making jet aircraft. I said yes because the company can also make hover cars and it can also make power plants. Now, what's a power plant? A power plant generates free energy. So I got involved in this, and after I left Gaia and I went out on my own, I started doing my own conferences online, and frankly, the profits were frighteningly high. I don't need all this money. What am I going to do? Am I going to go buy some house that's going to make everybody hate me? Spend $3 million on some huge mansion, and then everybody hates me? And what if things happen in the world and I can't make this kind of money anymore? Am I investing this money? Is real estate the best investment for somebody like me? I had had a dream where my grandfather urged me to join Stavati, and he was in aerospace. He had 86 patents, I believe. The most famous one is the turret for the helicopter, the axle that makes the wings spin up top. He's got a bulletproof turret around there. So that was his invention, and he did a lot of other stuff, military aerospace related. So he came to me in a dream and said, I want you to join this company. And that really is why I did it. I was certainly concerned about the same type of public ridicule that I would get from this Edgar Cayce information. It was not something I really wanted to do, to be involved in a military company at first. But Michael really insisted. And he also insisted that I not have a sense of shame about it. So, because people want to deliver that to you. But if you continue to exist in shame, then maybe you're only going to continue to spend 80 or 90 or 100 or 150 million dollars per aircraft. Because everybody's so angry about it that it just happens in a dark area and nobody talks about it. If you can lower the cost by 400%, and this is one of the main things you spend money on in any nation's budget, that's a very, very significant humanitarian relief. You're freeing up money for education, for healthcare, for civic improvements, infrastructure, plumbing, water, sewage, new cities, new roads, new buildings. All of that type of stuff is made available to the people if you can lower the price of their aircraft. But again, it was really the lure of the hovercraft that got me in when I said, yeah, we could do this patent and we could build this type of a technology. So after having been in this company for a while, and then I did these conferences and a surprising amount of money showed up, I decided to invest the money in Stavati because I'd now become involved in this And we were trying to raise money, and we were having horrible, horrible trouble. And that's sadly our entire experience with the venture capital fundraising has just been complete heartache. And I think it's like 6 years now we've been doing this. Just complete heartache. Nothing has ever worked out. And I think that what we're starting to see in the banking system is evidentiary of why. And so when I had this liquidity come in, and we have a facility that we can acquire as part of a state grant to create jobs, and it's affordable enough that we can actually do it with the assets I have, I said, well, hell yeah, our company's a lot more substantial if we have a massive military facility, 180,000 square feet, 5 or 6 different buildings. I mean, they're huge. And it's all, barbed wire fence, and there's a security checkpoint, and there's this big, massive hangar in there with a 5-foot thick concrete roof, big enough to build just about anything you can imagine, including the largest aircrafts, so it was stunning. And we could prototype in there. So that's what I did. And that way, nobody can be angry at me about making money because I didn't go and do something stupid. I didn't go and spend it on myself. I spent it on creating jobs and trying to upgrade our civilization. So that's my commitment to the truth is so extreme that I took all my money and threw it into this. And it's been a very, very long road, but we have now basically pretty much given up on the fundraising community. There's maybe a few deals that might happen, but every single deal we've ever tried to do has not worked. So a lot of people have been complaining about, David talked about hover cars and he didn't do anything. Well, look, we've been trying. We've been working constantly. This is part of why I've been, not doing the public thing is, believe me, I'm very busy. But enough things are happening now that we have confidence that we might be able to bypass investors completely and just go right into purchase orders. Some countries do not want to ever make an order unless you can already show them that you have at least $25 or $50 million in the bank, which we don't right now. So they're like, well, you're not a real company unless you have equity. Okay, the real estate isn't enough. The IP that we have from our designs and patents isn't okay. That's fine. But other countries are stepping up, and none of this is stuff that we're announcing yet. But there are a large number of countries that are at least demonstrating interest, and I think everybody's waiting to see if we can really pull this off. And if we can't pull it off, nobody's going to do anything. But there might be a couple who are crossing the line enough to at least give us some development money. And if we get even, $15 million, which might sound like a lot, but in aerospace, it's piddly. A typical aerospace project, just to inaugurate any aerospace project, is at least $80 million, normally. But we're trying to get this in really scrappy, really lean, get it started, create jobs. And so it's beginning to look like it's going to happen. And there are 3 major divisions of the company, and one of those divisions has hover car focus, and I'm going to be very intensely involved in this. The U.S. Navy declassified patents by Salvatore Pais, whose name, interestingly enough, means savior of our nation. And the Salvatore Pais patents describe anti-gravity through shooting energy down needles and then getting thrust, which is Kenneth Shoulders / Chris Beskar. Chris Beskar, and I'm going to leak some stuff that we can finally talk about, thank God. He designed classified aerospace projects, and he contacted ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, and said, can you build me a full-size mock-up of this really crazy, scary-looking, amazing spaceship where you've got inset lights, and they're the right colors, and it's all sexy and sleek, and it's full size, and it looks exactly like the real thing. And so he sends this to them, and they ended up doing it, and he paid them with this classified contract money. And they're like, what in the hell is this? What's going on here? And he was able to tell them a little bit about what's going on, that these are real designs. And so I don't know if it's in the first It is. I think it's in all three of the Star Wars prequels, including Episode 1, Phantom Menace. A preponderance of the designs that you see in the first three Star Wars prequels are actually real, and they're Chris's designs, and he licensed those visual illustrations to the ILM people. And as an honor for this, they named the Beskar armor after him. So that's the truth. And so, if, for example, if you look at Anakin Skywalker in the Episode 1, where he's in this kind of drag race with various extraterrestrials, if you go back and actually watch it, you'll see that there's these hovering cans in the front of the craft. And then there's like chains that go back to a seat. And the cans are kind of like the thrust, and they're in the front. Well, that's actually part of the design. It turns out that you need to have two bulkheads coming out. You need to have two horns or two antennae. And again, people say, oh my God, horns are evil, antennae are evil. Well, no, it's what nature does. There's a whole lot of reasons why you need antennae. And in the case of the charge clusters, you can run the anti-gravity jets up and down along the lateral length of the bulkhead, and then you can steer. So you can steer this way, and now you're going to start going this way, or you can steer this way and start going this way, and it's dependent upon where the jets are, and that's why in Star Wars that the engines are in the front. And of course, you know, the way they illustrate it doesn't necessarily look authentic, but so you do need to have, at least in this type of design, you have to have a way to shunt that space out. And so some people were looking at the SM39 design that we have and saying, oh, it looks so unstable, it would fall apart. Actually, the two bulkheads on the sides that are as long as the fuselage, they increase the stability. Once it all gets put together, that actually helps it fly faster and fly longer, and that's going to be the fastest aircraft ever made with conventional propulsion. So when the Salvatore Pais patents came out and essentially leaked Chris's invention, if you will, it was fascinating. And so that's why, again, we're going to do a movie, Levitation, which covers this and some other fascinating subjects, including levitating saints in the Christian tradition and other traditions, Buddhist, Taoist, Zoroastrians, and, you know, whirling dervishes, Sufism, you name it. There's a lot of levitation. So starting this company was a big move, and I really have been the only force that kept it from dying for years financially, because we did have a few other capital raises that were small, but very few. So I think I've been predominantly the principal financier of this whole thing, and I had to carry it on my back. And then Chris comes out to my house, and we shot the disclosure, which was a 6-week, it eventually became 7 or 8 week course, where we talk through all of this stuff. We talk about the patents. And so at some point, hopefully not too distant future, I'm going to have my own network where you can watch this and you can watch the other launches that I did before that people had to pay for. Because I don't want you to have to go back and pay full price for all of them. As I start making money from doing things like aerospace, my goal is to try to reduce costs to the viewer and keep things at a more reasonable level, like doing just a basic Netflix type of business model. So that may be happening. It's definitely on my mind. I'm talking about it, thinking about it, and it's been on my mind for years. How do I do this? There's a lot of good video that I want you to be able to see. So, you know, that's in progress, and I won't say that we're there yet. It's further down the road. The immediate hurdle is getting through the Michael Prophecies. So Chris came out here. We shot the disclosure. There's some really, really amazing stuff in there that covers so many different topics, including all the material about exotic metamaterials, quasi-crystals, sacred geometry inside microscopic molecules, what happens when you have those things, which could be called microclusters, for example. They repel charge from going inside. They have incredible durability. And it turns out that with certain types of quasi-crystals, if you electrify them, you get anti-gravity. The shape of the material causes little orbs of charge clusters to come off, just like Dr. Shoulders discovered. So there are certain materials that will create levitation just by electrifying them. And that apparently is one of the technologies that was on some of the stealth designs. And this is one of the technologies that was leaked to Art Bell and was called Art's Parts, where he describes a compound that has bismuth in it. That's one of the key alloys. And if you electrify this bismuth alloy, it starts levitating. Well, that's true. It works. Because the bismuth shoots out charge clusters as it gets energized. The sacred geometry creates the needle points that you need to roll off and create charge clusters, and that's what nature does. So there's some really cool stuff you can do with exotic metamaterials, and that's one of the really exciting things about aerospace is how the big money that's being spent on developing new stealth coatings and new radar evasion technologies and hypersonic technologies, all this kind of stuff. As that technology gets developed, it has incredible consumer spin-offs, which include power plants. So one of the things that we're hoping to do, and I'm going to take a drink of water, I'm very thirsty. You want to see your comments again here? Here they are. It's always moving. No lithium. Don't worry, we're not going to use lithium if we can avoid it. There's power plant technologies that are very amazing. They're safe, they're easy to use. So what we're planning on doing, hopefully, is having a device that creates, let's say, 50 kilowatts, which is more than enough to run your house, and it costs $5,000. And one of the things that we're looking at possibly doing, I don't know which one we're going to do, but one of them is the thorium reactor. And if we use thorium, believe it or not, I guess it was World Book Encyclopedia in 1956, all these agents went around the country and ripped out the T page on thorium because it was discovered that you can make energy with thorium without radioactivity, basically cold fusion. And it works a lot better than the Pons and Fleischmann method, by the way. The thorium reactor, we would have to create a thorium fuel, which currently involves the use of high-energy particle accelerators. We would have to redesign that system to be able to do it in bulk. But that fuel could become very inexpensive if we designed it in bulk. And then in that case, if you have a thorium design, there's no radiation, it's totally safe. If it breaks open, you're not in any danger, and you only put fuel in it once a year, and the fuel is non-toxic. The reaction does not create radiation, but it does create energy. So the thorium reactor we might do, but there are other ones that wouldn't even require a fuel. They just run. And there's magnetic designs, there's all kinds of interesting things. And so part of what my job is going to be in the company is to figure out which of these technologies is the most environmentally friendly, isn't going to create toxic runoff, isn't going to do damage to you if it's turned on. There are some types of energy devices that create adverse health effects, which we certainly do not want. And so either way, the goal is to get it down to about $5,000, where once you've made this investment, your house just runs. It's similar to having solar panels, except that you don't have to worry about the sun running out of energy or that there's clouds or snow or anything like that. In this case, there would probably also be a great number of jobs created for the utility companies as they begin working to transition us from wired power to in-home installations. So there's going to be an enormous job market for in-home installations to get the $5,000 50 kilowatt device hooked up to your circuit breaker so that your house is now being powered. But I want you to think about this. You have become financially independent. Once you have that device, once it's paid off, you don't have to ever pay an energy bill again. You don't ever have to worry about running out of money getting the lights turned off. So that's incredible, to have that freedom where your cost of living is going to go down so much, because something like 75 to 80% of the money that we spend is on heating and cooling and various fuels. And that would include gas money for driving. That would include air conditioning and heat in the winter. So if you can heat your home, if you can cool your home, and you're not paying for it, that puts like 80% of the money that you earn back in your pocket. And that gives you freedom where you can start saving money. And then when we have the hover car technology, the technology, we know it works. It's already been done in the inside world. And the Navy declassified this specifically to save our nation, hence Salvator Pius, savior of our nation. This looked like low-hanging fruit to me. I said, let's build this patent. So there may be aspects of the Salvator Pius patent that we use. Now, the hover car is also a very fascinating topic because there are some technologies that most people don't know about that are going to go into its construction. For example, if you look at volcanic glass, that type of material is known as basalt, and there's basalt everywhere. It turns out that because basalt is something that directly crystallized out of a very intensely heated molten material, that when you mess around with basalt, you can get quasi-crystals. You can get the same type of exotic matter physics that I was talking about with the bismuth, the Arts parts, where if you electrify Arts parts, they lift up off the table. Well, that's one of the things you can do with these composites that are made from volcanic basalt. They also are the secret to developing the type of materials that you've heard about in crashed UFOs, where the material cannot be cut, it cannot be bent, it cannot be burned, but it is very, very lightweight. That's the secret. Because it was already molten in the volcano, you can make it into a quasi-crystalline lattice where it has incredible hardness and is very, very lightweight. So apparently the manufacturing technology that we're going to start using for the hover car is that we're going to print them, 3D print them out of volcanic basalt, which is cheap. So the materials are cheap. It's going to require new machines, new tooling. They've already done it before, believe me. But we're going to be doing it openly. And so our original plan with Stavati was that we acquire this facility in Niagara Falls, maybe another facility in the area, and we go into manufacturing and we create a new city in Wheatfield Business Park, which is immediately north of where the plant is, that we actually create, roads and septic and electric, and we create housing, and we have different types of housing for different types of budgets, and we're going to have high-end jobs that pay well and give you a solid future and rejuvenate the economy of Western New York. In the past week, we've had some very exciting progress towards this goal being realized that I'm happy about. We still have never gotten any money, but I think that's going to happen. So when that starts to happen, when that starts to kick off, I will probably end up spending a good bit of time in Niagara Falls. I'll probably have a house there. So I've been very deeply involved in this aerospace company, and I really wanted to have something for you by 2017, 2018, because once we're funded, we're going to have a working prototype in 1 year. And so everybody who tries to say that this is BS and that you guys made it up and it's all nonsense, no, there has been a very consistent through line throughout my entire career, going back to the 1990s, of meeting insiders, talking to them, comparing what they have to say. I released so much of this information online, in books, over many, many years, ever since I first got online. So this is something that's been involved for many years. Pete Peterson was leaking very incredible things, 2009, 2010. Jacob was leaking incredible things. We had also Henry Deacon gave me some very incredible stuff about going to Mars and about various extraterrestrial races that he had met. And these were widely distributed in very popular radio shows and articles that I wrote, books that I wrote, videos that I made, public conferences that I gave. This is what I do. I leak inside intel. So eventually, the only logical place for me to go is to say, look, if the U.S. military is following through with a plan, which Pete told me about in 2009, this plan to arrest the bad guys, bring out this forbidden technology they do not want you to have, I want to be part of that plan. I want to be part of that initiative to save humanity. I want to build new cities. We have a whole plan with 22 different colleges and universities in New York State where they will offer an associate's degree program to high school students, and or you can get the degree by going to the college and getting a 2-year degree. But the point is, you do need some training to build, to have a high-tech job. And we need high-tech jobs coming back to America. We can't have those jobs going overseas. America has technology that nobody else expects to see yet. And so if we create that technology here, the jobs are created here, we can also rejuvenate our economy, because if you have a power plant that costs $5,000 and every single American household wants to have one, that's an enormous economic stimulus that is totally conversant with something like developing the nuclear bomb in the Manhattan Project, or essentially militarizing American society in World War II, where you have, women out there making artillery shells. Happened right in Schenectady, New York. We were a boom town caused by World War II, and then they pulled out after World War II, and the job market collapsed. My dad lost his job at GE in the 1970s more than once. He got laid off, unemployed. And this is a story throughout America. So I have to give full credit to President Donald J. Trump for coming out with something that is probably the most significant event of my life when he announced Agenda 47. He has mentioned in this plan that he intends to build up to 10 cities based upon proposals that people give they're going to release tracts of federal land that are now, it's less than 1% of the land, but this is exactly what I was talking about. There's all this undeveloped land out there, and if you have hover cars, you can go visit that land. So Trump and his people took it way beyond anything that I had envisioned, because we're just doing it with one city. We have 22 colleges. You get an associate's degree. We'll pay for you to get the degree. You just have to work for 4 years while making lots of money, but you just have to commit to the 4 years. So that's kind of how it works. You get your education paid for, you get a good paying job, and then in 4 years of doing the job, you're totally debt free. So now to see this come out where it could be 10 cities across America, and if you go back and look at what he said, he specifically mentions hover cars. Now, a lot of people laughed at this because they think of hover cars as what Chris and I call the flying lawnmower, a bunch of whirling lawnmower blades. You do not want that. That's going to chop people's arms and legs and heads off. Some people might want that, but we don't really want joyriders going around with a hover car that's got a bunch of spinning blades. If you have ducted fans, you can have the duct around the outside of the blades, but they're still really, really dangerous. Birds can fly in there and get chopped up. So the part that Trump didn't really say yet is that the hover car technology is based on the declassified Navy patents from Salvatore Pais, which in turn come from Dr. Kenneth Shoulders and Chris Beskar collaborating on an invention. And it does work. It does create levitation. One of the things that we have is the SM-36 Stalma, which is a jet that levitates off of the ground. It'll be a complete vertical takeoff with no jets, no fans, no blown air. It just goes, it rises up, and then off it goes. And as I've said before, our hover car design works pretty much the same way. It's going to have wings that fold down. You use the air, and we have a maximum traveling speed of 250 miles an hour. We have flight altitude of 2,500 feet, so we're below regulation airspace for airplanes. These craft will not be able to go into space, and they will not be able to go faster than 250. But 250 is almost as fast as a typical jet flight. And so you'll be able to travel. The way in which it would change people's lifestyle is totally amazing. If new land and new cities are being opened up and hover cars are available, you could potentially be working to develop that new city while still having another property somewhere else and traveling to that new city by hover car to help work this out. Because this is obviously a long-term plan. And also, what Trump is calling Agenda 47 is something that Pete was telling me about in another forum all the way back in 2009. The U.S. military is not at all this ridiculous caricature of the My Lai Vietnam massacre like we see in the new Avatar movie, which I couldn't even watch. Once they're going to go harpoon whales, I'm like, no, I'm done, man. This is not my vision of the military. My vision of the military is a peacekeeping force that does not commit ethical atrocities whatsoever, that is involved in saving us from people who want to do these things. And what's one of the biggest rigged things they got going? It's energy. Making you overpay for electricity, for home heating and cooling, for the fuel in your car, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are given technology that gives you freedom, they don't like that, because that means it's the freedom from paying them money. And they want you to keep paying them money. You see, this is how it works. So where I am today is that I'm founding this aerospace company. It's very fascinating. It's fun. There's a lot of things going on. The money has been completely non-existent up until now. And therefore, I've been really running on fumes because, as you know, for a year now, I've done no videos. I've only done videos where I'm not seen. I'm filming my turkeys and things on the land here. And I had a very intense process to move through in the course of getting a divorce and all of the emotional issues that come up when you're no longer in a romantic partnership, you're alone, which I really was avoiding. You know, I was avoiding being alone. I was avoiding dealing with the pain of death threats that I'd received about being Edgar Cayce reincarnated, allegedly. I avoided the pain of having thousands and thousands and thousands of people hunt me and stalk me and create the most outrageous hatred online. And yeah, people want me to talk about what happened with Corey Goode. Okay, so Corey Goode had a court deposition that was illegally leaked. He is in lawsuits with various former associates. And in his court testimony, and he says it's for the purpose of, you know, what are you going to do? If you're out there saying that you were contacted by extraterrestrials, you're going to be completely discredited. So his decision, as he explained it to me, was to say that he made it all up. Or that's not really the right way of saying it. If you watch the video, he says that there were experiences that he had in his childhood that he feels are authentic, and that he also created information as well. Now, this was a big issue for years because Pete Peterson didn't believe anything that Corey was saying, and yet I went forward with the show anyway. I believe that Corey was telling me the truth, and there are aspects of his story that do ring true. So then we have to get into a question of, well, what is channeling? And how would you know if what you're doing is really authentic or not? Well, certainly when we talk to somebody like a Pete Peterson, he says that there are many, many aspects of what Corey said that don't match up with what they've heard. And so as a result of what has happened, this video was leaked against Corey's will. This is a very important point. It was leaked illegally. Nobody was supposed to see this, although if you're going to make these statements under sworn deposition, sooner or later somebody will. There's all these comments I'm seeing coming in. Oh, you need to defame Corey. You need to swear against him and all this stuff. It's like, wait a minute. You know, I would have never done that. I would have never blended. If what he's saying in his deposition is true, that's not how I worked. I've never done that. But at the same time, he had such a strong desire to get this information out. And when I've talked to people in our company, one of the things we all agree on, pretty much all of us agree on, is that it was in the vicinity of truth. It was heavily, heavily referencing all these different things that were true that had already been leaked. And Corey had the optimum timeline, which was this idea that something happened where we didn't have a solar flash in 2012, as my research had led me to conclude. So the optimum timeline is a very big part of the Michael Prophecies. And the Michael Prophecies, again, is something that started coming in 1996, and it lasted through 1999. Around the same time that Chris came out here and we did this show called The Disclosure, that's when the divorce was happening. And so it was a very upsetting and difficult time in my life. And that's when I found these prophecies in the Michael readings from the 1990s that were very, very dialed in to our present. So I made a series of YouTube videos that you can go watch back in the collection here. We're probably going to try to move the animal videos somewhere else so everything will be easy to find. But in the previous videos, I talked about these prophecies, and it was very amazing how prophetic they were. And that has continued. After my divorce, I really just needed to take a break. And Michael then ends up telling me as of last May that until I finish at least some of the books, I can't go back on video. That was a divine punishment or assignment, if you will. It was very difficult. It's easy for any of us to build an identity around being a public figure. I like public speaking. I feel that I'm very verbally articulate. I like to do that and convey information in this way. And so to completely walk away from this, I mean, I had cobwebs on these cameras. I had dust on these cameras. I had to clean them all off. I had to take down all these things I'd hung over everything so you don't even really see it anymore. And now here we are. I'm back online. I got a sizzle jacket, and this is good. So let's talk just a little bit. I'm at the 2-hour mark, and I really don't want to go any farther than this, so I got to cut this off very soon. The Michael Prophecies, I ended up being given an assignment that I had to go through all of my journals from 96 through 99, comb through them, find all the readings that are relevant to what's going on now, and put them into these books. It started out as 3 volumes, 97, 98, 99. And then 98 and 99 were so large that they ended up expanding into double volumes. So now there's 5 volumes, and I am writing in at least all but one of them big author's preface sections that are very fascinating, in which I have had some information that I felt was so scary and contentious in some cases, like regarding solar flash and Satanism and demons. I never wanted to publish this stuff before. And I honestly didn't know if I really believed in the demonic either. I mean, I'd seen these sources, but I'm like, I just don't know if this stuff really rings true. I found out in the last year, part of the briefings I got in 2021, around the time of the disclosure, that it turns out that if you practice certain very sadistic rituals involving the offering of a human life, and you do it the right way, that you can get a mass hallucination that appears to kill the victim. And in my book, I give some evidence that suggests that it might be a mass telekinetic murder and that there's nothing actually there. Because one of the witnesses who saw this saw an animal being levitated and killed with no visible thing in the area. So whatever this demonic thing is, we don't really know. We don't really know if they're real beings or if they're hallucinations. And it does appear that they look different to different people in the room. But these entities, if you will, develop some type of self-awareness, some type of consciousness. And when a demon shows up, it's always in need. It's hungry, it's angry, it wants you to help it. And so apparently the Mephistopheles, deal with the devil, bargain with the devil, getting demonic power, that stuff works, and people are doing it. So that really needs to be stopped. And then you find out that not only is the evil side bigger and more real than we thought, but so is the good. Somehow Edgar Cayce levitated off of the ground and channeled through this Archangel Michael, and eventually in 1999, that's what the source declared that it was with me. So it's been a horrible amount of work. I mean, honestly, I really don't ever want to do anything like this again. I am so tired. I'm so tired of writing these books. I'm so tired of having carpal tunnel syndrome and having my right hand not work right. And I finally am like, Michael, look, we got to get back on video. I just can't do this anymore. And so I'm almost done with the 3rd book, which was originally all it was going to be is 3. So again, we're giving you a $22 discount off the price, $77 if you type in Ascension, and the website is thedisclosure.com. At this point, I am very, very financially imperiled. So you coming forward, stepping forward, helping me with doing this is a very big step in rehabilitating my life and getting me so that I don't just eat staple food and have no travel money and I'm stuck in this house all the time. Honestly, I mean, I couldn't afford to do anything else right now. So I walked away from a job that pays very, very well. Obviously, it created the money to do these plants, but instead of doing online conferences and doing things that would make cash, I've done no ads, no products whatsoever for a year and a half. Almost 2 years. And so that's the time that it took to develop this one thing, which is these 5 books. It's not just books either. It's going to be audio. I'm going to be sitting right here in this studio, And I'm going to be recording. I'm going to have, all these soundproofing devices lined up. This will all be shielded off. I got a curtain right here I can pull closed. It's going to sound wonderful. Everybody loves my audiobooks the most. Steven Tyler told me that when he drove around his Jeep in Hawaii, that he only had David Wilcock CDs in there. That's all he's hearing when he's driving around. That's true. So I want to do something that's really lasting of value. And again, the narrative is so fascinating. It's hard to even talk about how well integrated this is with the present. There's in the volume I'm about to release, let me just freshen up the camera here. In the volume I'm about to release, there's this whole incredible, vast section about the Chinese balloon, where they predicted the Chinese balloon right while it was happening. As it's happening in the world, I'm reading that part of the book from 1998. Bam, there it is. Same thing happened with East Palestine disaster. They have train metaphors, gas metaphors, chemical metaphors. Zelensky is in there. Biden is in there a bunch of times. Kamala Harris is in there. I mean, it's just, it's very hard to describe what this book really is. It's a Christian archangel explaining that it's a time traveler, explaining that he showed up throughout history and hid himself so that he wouldn't be identified, using these different names, including Saint Germain, who appeared in front of the founding fathers at the time of the signing of Declaration of Independence, knew all the secret handshakes, knew everybody's name, gave them weird personal information he shouldn't have known, and he told everybody, you have to sign this. It's way more important than you realize. The British are not going to kill you. Just please get this done. And they did. And so these positive beings have been editing our future throughout time, and this is now being realized in what we see, where another very significant contact, as I've said in the previous videos, if you want to go get caught up on those, was Valiant Thor. This was a human ET, showed up in 1957, spent 3 years working in the Pentagon, and part of what he did when he was there was to devise this thing called the Plan, which was, he had the full benefit of time travel in doing it. Pete apprised me of the Plan in 2009. A lot of insiders know about the Plan. And what we're seeing in the world now, very obviously, is the fulfillment of the Plan. And the Plan has largely been conducted peacefully. We're not in a nuclear war. We're not in mandatory inoculations. We're not in forced detention camps. Passports didn't happen. And so there's this long Super Bowl that's just all muddy, and it's gone on for so many innings, or whatever you call it in football. It shows you how little, that's baseball, right? Innings are, yeah. So anyway, that extraterrestrial DNA end up not being interested in sports a lot of the time. So I'm sorry about that. But now we're at a point where everything is looking really good. If you are afraid, if you think that what's happening in the world is some terrifying bad thing, then you don't get what's going on. It's not terrifying. It's not bad. It's actually very, very positive. I mean, I've got a sizzle jacket on. That should tell you right there, if I'm willing to put the orange neckerchief inside the pocket, there's something going on, folks. Something very positive. I wouldn't do this unless I felt good. And we do have a prophecy of transformation, of course. So think about it. I've got everything on my side here to tell me, let's go back to the other camera. I've got everything on my side here to tell me that there is something, there is a fire where the smoke of Michael Prophecies is, and it is incredible. These beings are telling us that we are not going to experience earth changes. They are telling us in these books, which again, you can buy the first two right now. They're already there. The third one's is going to come out any day. Everything that's just happened with D.A. Alvin Bragg, it's all in there, folks. I mean, I'm amazed, because if they're right about everything up until now, which they have been, why would they be wrong about the rest? And they're telling us to expect arrests. They're telling us to expect massive disclosures of truth. They're telling us that forbidden technology is going to become available. They're telling us to expect some sort of galactic family reunion with these fifth density beings that can project into human form. And then they have a functional human body, and they're going to be apparently interacting with us in this manner. And a lot of them. I don't think it's just a few. I think there's going to be a lot of them, and we'll call them people. In the book I'm about to release right now, they say that they're going to have an embassy, and they say that they want me to run it. That sounds really crazy, and I just hope you don't laugh or ridicule me, but I'd rather leave it in than take it out because I'm afraid of being ridiculed. If these people want to do this, if they want to use me to bring out some kind of information and tell us that we're going to be safe and that they're going to have an embassy, that's great. But again, I didn't get to the full point. The real bottom line of what these books are telling us is that within 2 years, we are all going to experience what Christians would call the rapture or ascension. Jesus was so amazing in what he did. His mission, his offering, was so powerful that he got the ultimate optimum timeline out of it. And now everybody gets to become Christ. Just like John 14:12 says, again, Jesus was quoted by John saying, "As I do these things, as I do these miracles, so shall you do them, and greater things, for I go unto my Father, Mother, God." That right there is in the Bible. It's scriptural. You can't dispute it. And it says that you will become like Christ. That's what Jesus is here for. But there's these funny passages in the book of Revelation that have led people to believe that maybe only 144,000 people are going to ascend, right? Oh, it's the 144,000. Well, the Michael Prophecies has demonstrated pretty much, as far as I can tell, an unprecedented display of prophecy accuracy. I mean, I've got it all laid out. You can study it in as much depth and detail as you want. You can go back and look and see that these readings were online. I could not have faked any of this. It's all real. And it's all prophetic of what's going on now. And all you have to do is decode it. And some of the decoding is very easy. Some of it's really on the nose. You don't have to decode anything. And so they tell us, yes, you're going to see a lot of bad guys getting arrested. But we don't want you to get totally wrapped up in that because we only have 2 years left from the time these books are coming out before we have to allow your sun to change the physics of your solar system. Physics changes are just like passing go on Monopoly board and collecting $200. They happen. You can't do anything about it. That's what all these ancient prophecies tell us. And so what kind of abilities might we have as this goes on? Well, this gets into some slides. I did want to do a couple of these again. You might have seen me do this before, but this will close us out here. The Kali Yuga prophecies. What is the Kali Yuga? The Kali Yuga is this concept of the end of the age in Hinduism. And so the Kali Yuga prophecies tell us what kind of abilities we're going to have, and they're totally amazing. So check this out. We're going to be reading from Vanaparva, which is book 3 of the Mahabharata. And so in the Kali age, which is the age we're in now, the fallen age, the Brahmanas abstain from prayers and meditation. This means the holy people are not meditating. You've heard me read this prophecy before. The course of the world looks bad, contrary, and indeed these are signs that foreshadow a universal destruction. Numerous Maleka kings rule over the earth. In the original slides, I put in this picture right at the moment Biden grabbed the 81 million ballots. You can see him holding on to them in his hand there. And then you look up close at his eyes, and I'm like, man, these eyes look really, really creepy and disturbing, you know, like what's up with that? But anyway, the sinful monarchs addicted to false speech govern their subjects on false principles. Men become short-lived, weak in strength, energy, and prowess. They have small might and diminutive bodies and become scarcely able to tell the truth. That's why we have the truth teller, right? Many men at such periods strive to rob the wealth that has been deposited with them in secrecy by trust. And wedded to sinful practices, they shamelessly declare that we have nothing in deposit for you, the bank collapse. That's what they're talking about, banking collapse. And that's sure happening right now, isn't it? And then in their 16th year, men are overtaken with decrepitude and decay, and the period of life itself is soon outrun. When the lives of men become so short, a drought occurs for many years. 7 blazing suns appear and drink up all the water of the earth in the river or sea. And that's a metaphor of the 7 chakras being activated. And then, O Bharata, the fire called Samvardhaka, which is the solar flash, impelled by the winds, appears on the earth that has already been dried to cinders by the 7 suns. And this transitions directly into the Krita Yuga, where it says, when those terrible times will be over, the creation will begin anew. Clouds will begin showering seasonably again, which we really could use. I hated this winter. The stars and stellar conjunctions will become auspicious, and the planets duly revolving in their orbits will become exceedingly propitious. All around there will be prosperity, abundance, health, and peace. And then the Kalki avatar shows up. Now, is this really one person? No. This is basically the second coming of Christ, the second coming of the Logos, the activation of Christ in humanity. It's just the Hindu time-traveled version of the prophecy. And commissioned by time, a Brahmana of the name of Kalki will take his birth. He will glorify Vishnu, possessing great energy, intelligence, and prowess. Vehicles, weapons, warriors, arms, and coats of mail will be able to be created by spontaneous conscious manifestation. That's what it says right there. He can think these things into existence. He will be the King of Kings, ever victorious, with the strength of virtue. He will restore order and peace in the world, crowded with creatures and contradictory in its course. And that blazing Brahmana of mighty intellect having appeared will destroy all things that are not in the light. He will inaugurate a new yuga, surrounded by the Brahmans. That Brahmana will exterminate all the Malekas wherever these low and despicable persons may take refuge. When the Brahmanas have been exterminated and the thieves and robbers are also exterminated, sorry, I read that a little wrong. Let me try that again. When the Brahmanas will have exterminated the thieves and robbers, there will be prosperity everywhere on earth. Okay, so here's the 8 faculties that we can all start to look forward to as this solar evolution and our ascension begins happening, according to what this book is saying. This is from the Virtual Maastricht McLuhan Institute. Great power, might, dominion, supremacy, dignity, and superhuman power. So then there's a list of what these things are. You can make your body incredibly small, just like we see in a variety of Hollywood films, Ant-Man being the most recent one, right? Extreme lightness, meaning you can make yourself very light, you could levitate. The power to attain anything, this is spontaneous manifestation of objects. Again, they said you can manifest warriors, weapons, you name it. Irresistible will, prakamya. That means the ability to get your will met. If you're one of these high-powered beings, you have the voice of power, and in the book we talk about what that is, and it's very intense. How Edgar Cayce was able to vibrate the walls of that house. Multiple eyewitnesses saw this on multiple occasions, and the voice of power can yank the demonics right out of somebody's body, apparently, and that's what apparently Jesus was using. So another thing is limitless bulk, which means you can become very large, very heavy. That's not necessarily something we want. We want to lose weight, not gain weight, but whatever. Supreme dominion. Again, this is like the dominion over the animal passions. And another one for that same purpose, subjugation by magic. Again, subjugating the ego, the carnal forces. And even another one, power to suppress all desire. So, in short, the Kalki avatar has abilities that are described that even seem to go beyond what Jesus was doing. Jesus wasn't creating whole armies of people or flying objects or anything like that with his mind that we know of. Maybe there are a couple scriptural references to this, but the biggest manifestations I'm recalling would be like loaves and fishes, that kind of thing. But certainly not on the scale that we're talking about here. And remember, in the Bible it says, as I do these things, so shall you do them, and greater things. So that's a very, very significant point. All right, I should probably get out of here because 2.5 hours is like way too long, and we're going to hit that pretty soon. So what I would like to do is just have a great drink of water because I really, really need one. How are you guys doing? He's totally going 3 hours, they say. Let's just read some comments here. Well, okay, well, everybody's happy. You guys are happy. That's good. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tolerating my sizzly outfit. It was, I definitely like gay clothes. The gayer they are, pretty much that suits me. So I'm not actually gay. I just, yeah, anyway, let's not talk about it anymore. I just like gay clothes. I'm sorry. And this is a very, very gay outfit. And I acknowledge that, but I'm proud because, you know, part of what you have to do is have pride. And so I'm proud of identifying as a sizzly, gay clothes wearing cisgender male. There. I think I've got everything right. I think I did it right. So yes, I appreciate these very unique threads that are very flashy. It's kind of like the solar flash, you know, I just feel drawn to it. So the Michael Prophecies is telling us, it's Archangel Michael telling us that they are going to protect they meaning the Logos and his angelic assistants, they will protect our physical bodies, they will protect us from harm, and it's all coming to a head no later than within 2 years. Now, what does it's coming to a head mean? It means that we are probably going to end up with, if what they're saying is true, I mean, it's very fascinating. We will be on a path to develop the 8 superhuman faculties. Some kind of change happens that is a mind-blowing psychedelic activation of consciousness and masterful yogi-like superpowers. We will start having this. We have done enough. That's the message of Michael's books. There's 5 of them. He keeps saying it in every volume, that we are going to be saved. We're not going to have earth changes. There's a different timeline that we're on. It's basically the same thing Corey was saying about the optimum timeline. So that's kind of compelling, you know? And there were messages that I had when all that stuff was getting started. When I said, is Corey in touch with the Ra of the Law of One? I was told, go outside now. And as you remember the story, I went outside and I saw a rainbow. They didn't say yes or no. They never actually answered the question, but they wanted me to do this show. And again, as the people in my company are saying, we were in the vicinity of truth. I also had death threats for doing the show. I was told by an insider that if I didn't stop doing cosmic disclosure, that I was going to be killed. And they said it came directly from the Rothschilds and that he was doing them and doing me a favor by conveying the threat. And this made me very angry. So I decided to keep doing the show. It was my job and I wasn't going to be intimidated. And very shortly after that, my wife at the time, Beth, lost the brakes on the car. And it was right after she'd gotten down the hill. Thank God it didn't happen before. Now, people can try to say we made this all up, but something caused the brakes to go out. And it happened right after she went down the hill. And if it had happened on the hill, she would have lost control and probably died. Because we have a very steep mountain that you got to go down. So when those kinds of things happen, it appears that people didn't like us doing a show that was in the vicinity of truth, even if it wasn't strictly accurate. My goal is to try to get you the truth and to try to go beyond any type of rhetoric and spoken dialogue and into action in the form of developed technology that proves to you that I was telling you the truth. And that's what we have now. And so there's several things that our hangar really needs. We have an immediate need to flush out plumbing for the heating and cooling system, and that's $8,600. So I would love to be able to pay that. So again, there's a small raise that I really need to do here. If you use the code Ascension, you get $22 off. That is the Michael Prophecies at thedisclosure.com. I would really love for you to get in there now. I won't be able to offer such big discounts once the books are all finished. But I am doing that now, and I believe it's absolutely worth your time. To me, this level of writing that I've done is as good as anything. It's my Sistine Chapel. It's my masterpiece. It's the pièce de résistance, whatever you want to call it. It's what I've spent more time developing than any other creative product in my life. It's incredibly fascinating to hear Michael's words and the way in which you get a multidimensional activation just by listening to what he says. So I am going to be coming back. I'm not going to disappear and go away for a long time. I don't want to be off camera because frankly, I'm really not talking to anybody. My entire life has been almost entirely silent meditation. I'm not having phone calls. I'm not having any acquaintances. I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm not hanging out. I'm not doing any outings. I'm always here and I'm always working on these books. It's been this way for like 2 years now. So I'm really tired of it. I'm ready to go out and meet people. I'm ready to go out and like have a life and not just be working on this all the time. But I also need your help to get me there so that I have enough money to be able to survive. I'm delaying tax payments right now. Things like this have to happen. So I'm on a payment plan. But we're going to get this all straightened out. And I'm confident that our company is succeeding and that we will have some very, very exciting things to show you in the future. When Trump put out Agenda 47, I want to give him my greatest sincere thanks. It is the fulfillment of what we were hoping to do. I kept talking about it on the phone. Like, I don't know how we can grow this to the point where everybody can get a hover car because we're only one factory and we can only make so many units a year. It really is going to take multiple factories designing these and generating these hover cars, 3D printed basalt composite chassis, new technologies. It's going to look gorgeous inside and out. This is the future. And this can rebuild our industrial base. Building new cities also allows us to have a housing surplus rather than a deficit. And with the technology, we're going to soon be able to go out into space. And apparently, Michael's prophecies are also saying that we are now just about done with the era where we don't get to meet our galactic family. We are going to be able to say hi to real extraterrestrials, interact with them. We all think we're not worthy of this, but I don't know if they're going to show up before the sun does its thing or not, but they're saying a maximum of 2 years. So that's another very, very fascinating thing. There's a lot of people worried about whatever shots might have occurred, if they took them. There's a lot of evidence that's come out now that even the most blindsided people probably can admit that, yeah, it's looking like they're really dangerous and it might be a ticking time bomb. I did have briefings telling me, I don't know if this is true, but one of the military briefings I got was that basically nobody who gets it will live more than 5 or 10 years maximum. I don't think it's true. I don't think that's the evidence that we're seeing out in the field at all. There's lots of evidence to the contrary. However, if that's the worst case scenario, if that's true, Michael makes it very clear that whenever this solar event happens, which could be any time between now and in 2 years, 2025, once that's happened, you will either be able to heal yourself or there will be other people who can heal you. So therefore, no matter how bad this looks, no matter how big of a jam we appear to be in, that we're going over the cliff, there's no escape, lots and lots more people are going to be lost, that is not necessarily true at all. There are things that we could do in the short term, and so Michael's main message is to live a more spiritual life. So with that said, I'd like to close us out here with group meditation. So this is the last thing we're going to do, and I'll keep it to the 90 minutes. So let's have you put both feet flat on the floor. I don't know if I have any good image cut I can do. Let's see. How does that look? It's all right. What do you think about that, huh? My face is like a... Yeah, we can do that. Okay. Here we go. As you breathe deeply, imagine yourself moving into an arena of perfect peace. The very difficult changes that have defined your life, that have caused you so much pain and suffering, are soon going to be coming to an end. The future is one in which everyone gets to have a spontaneous spiritual activation. And we live in the knowledge that what we will become makes our lives so much happier. It's like we've all become billionaires. We have superpowers. We can see into our past lives. We can hear other people's thoughts without communicating with our mouths. We're directly interacting with beings that have angelic capabilities that are mind-blowing. And we also have innate telekinetic and levitation capabilities once we begin developing these skills. As we breathe more and more deeply, we remember the promises of all the great teachers that we shall graduate that there will be a golden age. There will be a renewal that makes life on earth wonderful for everyone. Frascio Careti means making wonderful. So as we tumble through our lives and come up against fear and anxiety and pain and sadness and anger, let us not forget that each time we seek love in the moment, according to the law of one, we are creating an exponential increase in the power that we can draw upon for the good. Just like each additional memory of painful times from our past that inform the present, each new memory creates an exponential increase. So as we relive painful, traumatic memories, and as we learn, most importantly, to forgive those who have hurt us, we are now moving directly in the area to which the Logos wants us to go. The Logos being the cosmic Christ. And that is to embrace compassion, to embrace patience, understanding, forgiveness, and love. And to allow that love to emanate from us in how we talk to people and how we interact as we go throughout our days and as we feel the joy of companionship and sharing with others the truth of what really is going on as we see it. Making subtle changes, just having more patience, being more loving, truly is the answer. As the Law of One says, in forgiveness lies the stoppage of the wheel of karma. And we really don't want that wheel to continue any longer, individually or globally. Forgiveness by itself is augmented in the Law of One teachings, which I follow, with boundaries. And this means that you have the right and even the obligation to say no when others would try to hurt you and destroy your free will. You have the obligation to defend yourself and your family if someone is trying to hurt you. And this is how we're seeing it play out in the world now. Forgiveness with boundaries. There is a healthy and peaceful transfer of power taking place in the world as the negative elite are systematically being defeated. And then there will be the release of these new technologies that allow us to live much happier and healthier and more affordable lives. And there's also going to be a dimensional shift, a change in our consciousness. All of these things are possible. And all of these things become more and more within our reach as we learn to still the mind, breathe out the fear, the pain, and the anxiety, and glide ever more perfectly into trust, into love, and into an intrinsic knowingness of the goodness and the righteousness of that which is taking place today in the world. And so it is. Now I'd like you to breathe your way back into the room. Well, it's 4:31. That's pretty good with my eyes closed. I was only off by 1 minute. All right. Do we have it on the wide shot? Here, let's do that. So, somebody said, gaze into the abyss, and the abyss gazes back into you. Corey Good told the truth in court. I have never been to space. I have never met aliens physically. They were part of my imagination. Look, I really think it's not a good idea to go after Corey because what we ended up doing has led to this contact through the Michael Prophecies, which validated the optimum timeline philosophy. We are going to be okay. We're going to be all right. Something happened, and the way it chose to express through him involved, if his court testimony is the literal truth, that he embellished on it. Now, why does somebody need me to be like really mad at him and denounce him? And I don't hate him, because people threatened me for that show. And my ex-wife nearly died because of one of those threats. And again, I took the money that publicity and then my own conferences earned me, and I invested it into creating that future that we were talking about on the show. So Corey is now moving into video games and movies and such things and I told him, I think the best move for you to make is to, use visionary fiction to disclose information. And that's what he's doing. So I don't really have a problem with it. I mean, obviously, there would be ways in which I could be angry. People could expect me to be angry. They might be angry. He's sassy in his deposition. You know, his personality comes across as somewhat harsh and abrasive. But you got to understand the conditions. This was never supposed to be released. He's very upset. And there's some really, really scary stuff that he was going after. I mean, I've been ripped off. I've been ripped off for large amounts in certain cases. And I didn't choose to pursue legal action just because I don't want the disruption. And I think the legal interaction causes 2 or 3 years of your life and over $100,000 to shoot out the door. You got to really want it to do something like that, you know, and he did because of the things that occurred, which the cases go into detail about. So it's a very complex issue. I knew that people wanted me to talk about it. It's sort of necessary for me to talk about it. And again, he presented all of this to me as if it was the truth, that he was going into space, that these were real things. And if he had told me he was making it up, I never would have done the show. And none of this information would have gone out there. So the karma of whatever that is, if that is what happened, is something he has to deal with. And again, I have continued to support him because we've been through so much hell. We've had so many people threaten our lives. We've had so many people write such horrible things about us. And I stopped doing the show with Corey in 2018. That's the last time any episodes aired. That's 5 years ago. And there's all these people online who still act as if every single thing that Corey does is reflective of me and vice versa. And Corey is his own person. He's navigating his own path, and that's fine. And so to continue to try to say that everything that happened with him is some kind of indictment of me, well, that's not true. Because again, yeah, I made some money, but what did I do? I didn't go buy a house in Lake Tahoe. I didn't get the lakefront cabin. I instead did the right thing, what I feel, which is to finance this company, to get you a job, to get you a hover car, to get you into space, to get you meeting these extraterrestrials. So there's really nothing in the Michael Prophecies that could be successfully contested where you say, well, yeah, that's fake, that's not true. It's all validated by virtue of the fact that it was online. So at the same time, I can also say that when I was channeling it, I had no idea if I was doing anything that was going to be good. When I went back and read this stuff, so much of it was encrypted prophecies that make sense now that a lot of it didn't make sense at all, and it was incredibly frustrating. There are decipherings on almost every page that didn't make sense when the words came in, but now it's like, oh yeah, that's Joe Biden. Oh yeah, that's Zelensky. Okay, that's Kamala Harris. Okay, that's the Chinese balloon. That's another Chinese balloon. That's another Chinese balloon. Okay, that's the Afghanistan withdrawal. Okay, that's the Nord Stream pipeline. It's all in there. I mean, it's freaking amazing. I actually think probably everybody is going to end up reading this book, because if what they're saying really happens, if they use this as a way, they meaning these angelic beings, to introduce themselves to humanity, that's stunning. And it's very imposing. I have felt set up by these beings. I felt very frustrated by the fact that they've painted out this role for me as like running their embassy, as it says in the book. I don't even really know what that means. So there's tons and tons of mystery here, and I've had to really hang my ass out over the line and just put this stuff out. I mean, they call me Christina. They don't even honor me as a male. They identify me as a woman. In the first book, believe it or not, they say my soul is female and its name is Christina. And I'm having a male experience, and that does make sense to me. If you have a female soul, but you're in a male body, then that creates a discrepancy between the genetic influences and the soul influences. And I think some people have that. For me, I think that being a man is important. I think that I'm supposed to be, and I want to pursue that. But I also understand that, you know, like with the Jane Roberts books, if you read Seth always calls him Rupert, as if he was a man. And this is Jane Roberts, who's a female. But she had some masculine characteristics, so it kind of makes sense. So they did that to me too. They called me Christina. I was humble enough to leave that in. I mean, I didn't take out a lot of embarrassing things, but I left it all in because you have to go read this for yourself and decide if you believe that what's happening here is real. But I mean, when book 3 comes out and you see what's in this, it's going to blow your doors off. And again, I expect everybody's going to be aware of this book. So as time goes on, I'm going to be sharing more quotes. I hopefully will start to get into a routine that's fairly regular. Weekly would be ideal, but I have no idea if I can pull that off, honestly. But again, I want to thank you guys for participating in our group meditation. Thank you for watching. Yeah, so I've done pretty good chunk of time here. This is David Wilcock, and I am signing off. Thank you for watching. And please, again, we critically need your help for a number of reasons, including making sure our facility doesn't explode. So go to thedisclosure.com, enter in the promo code Ascension for a very generous $22 discount. You can dive in right now. The first 2 PDFs are ready to be downloaded. They're password protected. We didn't make some crazy encryption, but please don't steal it, and please don't redistribute it. You know, we're right now, the funding is very important, and I think you're going to be very, very blown away as this multidimensional consciousness begins speaking to you, because the words themselves sometimes are cryptical, they don't make sense, but it activates you in a multidimensional way. So if you're having a real struggle with some of the words that Michael says, it's sort of like what Khalil Gibran says in The Prophet. Half of the words I say are meaningless, so that the other half is activated within you. It's something to that effect. So this will activate some very interesting consciousness. People have had some very crazy visionary experiences after reading these books. The feedback we're getting is phenomenal. It is very personal. It does not speak to you through me. It speaks to you directly as a soul. So there's a very incredible handshake that you're making with the higher forces, because honestly, it appears that there's never really been something like this before, where it's so clear and it's so easy to read, relatively speaking. And again, by the time you get into book 3, book 2, volume 2, Michael's readings get a lot easier to read. And that continues on into books 3, volume 1, and books 3, volume 2. So anyway, this is probably going to be one of the last times that I sell anything, at least after this year. But I do need your help. So again, please go to thedisclosure.com. I will be back with you soon. I'm not going to be a deadbeat dad anymore, I promise. I'm going to try to wear nice clothes. I'm going to try to be cool and not make too much fun of you or insult you too much, because I know that hurts your feelings and I don't want to do that. So thank you everybody for watching. I hope I answered enough questions that you feel good about this. I think I'm going to post-produce this, maybe add some stuff in. But anyway, it's been great, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day.